run, ride, or fly to your nearest video store.
Go now!
And grab Terminator 2 for the best price ever.
Trust me. Come with me if you want to live.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Terminator 2, wherever videos are sold.
Now available at Strawberries for $14.99.
Malibu Comics presents Diablo Frank the Lego Machine and Ryan Daly on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Nuclear Twilight.
Parental discretion is advised.
About the Terminator, the war, the future war, the war of the machines. We never get to see that in the movies. I realize that you have a real closed loop between the first and second Terminator movies, but did you have any desire to see the war, or is it better being alluded to? Is John Connor more interesting as the dude with the scar on his face whose tale never really gets told?
Okay, as a kid, and again, like being like a young teenager when I'm first, like, you know, between 12 and 14, however old I was when I'm first experienced, yeah, that's all I wanted to see. I was like, give me a whole movie that's just set in the future. I want to just see like these like scrappy people living in burned out alleyways and sewers and everything, having to fight with these giant robot skeletons just wandering the streets, just killing everything. That's all I wanted. But, you know, 20, 30 years later growing up, I'm like, okay, I've seen shades of that in other media, in other forms, and I know what that story is, even if I haven't seen it. And it is much more, I kind of get it, and I see it more of just like it's more scary as the nightmare scenario of what might happen if the heroes don't succeed in the mission that they're trying to tell. And that's why James Cameron didn't make it about the movie about smashing Skynet in, you know, 2029 or whatever. It was about this fight for survival and preventing this thing in the past. Well, for budget reasons also, but like it was a much more human story about saving this one person that could end up changing the tide in this war. And I just think that is the more profound and more human and more sympathetic story that we can get behind. And maybe it's just because like now just being so saturated. I mean, after, you know, 20 years of Avengers movies, it's like, can they really do a future war movie that would look as impressive or have the same kind of stakes or just feel like that? I kind of feel like that genre is just it's been done, or it's the visual cues that were so impressive and so like scary and nightmarish at the time. I just think we're desensitized to that, not just like critically, but as almost aesthetically, in terms of just like the visual language of seeing so many big budget science fiction action movies right now that I don't know that I don't really care about seeing a future war movie, because I was like, I kind of feel like I've seen that even if I haven't.
Yeah.
So
you make a really interesting point that I hadn't thought about, because obviously I know a lot of people who like Terminator stuff wanted to see the future war movie, and the excuse was always there were technological problems, there were budgetary issues, it was just going to be too involved. But you make a really good point where even if you just watched 80s movies, there were so many Italian knockoffs where they would take some guys out in jeeps to the desert and do a post-apocalyptic story, and so much media from the 80s was post-apocalyptic, post-nuke narratives, Road Warrior and things like that it's like, I always thought of it in terms of, well, Cameron didn't do it because it would have been too expensive or would have been too challenging. But really, I think you're right. I think it's that so many people had already covered that ground and done the things you could do with that sort of nihilistic viewpoint, that world. Because I mean, it doesn't matter how hopeful you try to make it, if most of the people have been wiped out and the sky's blackened and there's twisted metal and broken bodies everywhere, there's only so happy of an ending you can get to when you're at that point in civilization. So it's like, yeah, if you actually want to tell something that takes people to a good place. And also, I think, you know, having grown up in the 80s under the specter of the nukes, and it was such a wonderful time in the early 90s when you know, Jesus Jones is singing about it, where the walls are coming down and the USSR is falling apart, and it feels like we're in a new epoch and we're not under existential threat constantly. And that was, the 90s was so great because we could look toward a future again, where for so many years it just felt like we were waiting for the bomb to drop and everything to end, and we would have no control over that and no recourse. We were just going to get nuked, and if you happen to survive, you're worse off than the ones that were dead. I guess that narrative would really play out by the time Cameron got around to doing the second movie, so it may have seemed pointless or backsliding into a mindset that we were just getting out of.
Excerpt from Hero Illustrated, number 22, cover dated April 1995. Marvel now cut back. Books are canceled. Now staffers go to freelance status. As the comic book industry continues to undergo restructuring on a number of levels, both Marvel and Now Comics have announced plans to cut back on the number of titles they publish. Marvel has announced plans to cancel 25 titles by the spring of 1995, including all Punisher and Conan-related titles, 3 of each, Black Wolf, Blade, Blaze, Darkhawk, Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D., Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel Comics Presents, Marvel Superheroes Magazine, Morbius, Namor, Night Thrasher, Nova, Ravage 2099 AD, Secret Defenders, Silver Sable, Spider-Man Magazine, and Warlock and the Infinity Watch. Also in February, Now Comics announced a reduction in their creative staff and published titles, in which all but 2 of their full-time staffers had been transferred to freelance status. We're still in the market, but taking a very cautious approach while we're waiting for the market to come back some, said Julian Birkin, publisher of Now Comics. As with a lot of independent publishers, we're waiting to see a little bit more of a consolidation and benefit. We still have a lot of back material and may see an opportunity to come back with some of those canceled books. The main thing is, again, like a lot of publishers, we're seeing a lot of softness with those numbers. And when the numbers start to come back a little bit, we can afford to be a little more aggressive in the release of books. According to Birkin, Now's cancellations are primarily Married with Children and Speed Racer. The company will continue to publish Siphons, their science fiction superhero title, and The Green Hornet, their premier licensed property. Excerpt from T2, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Cybernetic Dawn, Present War, number 1, Metallic Mayhem, by editor Dan Sheehan. Hello fans of the ever-popular world of Metallic Mayhem. Welcome to the latest addition to this Terminator saga. We here at Malibu, and the good people at Lightstorm Entertainment, are glad to bring you what I'm sure you'll all agree is the finest Terminator series of books to date. As you may or may not know, this is the first book of the 2 series running side by side on the racks. Just about the time you finish reading Cybernetic Dawn number 1, which takes place where the events of the T2 film left off, you can cartwheel on down to the shop and lay your hands on Nuclear Twilight number 1. That book takes place in the war-ravaged remains of America after Judgment Day in the year 2029. The human resistance, led by John Connor, is putting up a tough fight against Skynet and its machines and looking for a way to cripple the evil bugger. I really don't intend to go into detail about the storylines because, frankly, it would take a couple of pages that are not mine to use. I can tell you that there are some very creative surprises in store for our cast of characters in this miniseries, brought to you by the minds of Mark Paniccia and Dan Abnett. You must wait until both books come together in one flipbook number 0 issue to get the big smash 'em up finish. Finally, a special thanks needs to go out to these people. Carl Potts at the Marvel office back east for laying some of the groundwork early on. Van Ling of Band from the Ranch Entertainment for their invaluable input and expedience. Rob Pryor, who managed to bend way over backwards to get some really cool paintings in on time for these covers, and Lisa Lockhart down at the licensing group for helping to work through the legal kinks that come up in licensed books. I know that in general, special thanks go out in the last pages of a project that comes to a close, but I want to let some of the people who are helping us keep this book on target know that their help is appreciated. Before we get digging into this, I had a few things I wanted to comment on. Number 1, when Terminator 2 came out, I thought that You Could Be Mine was the best Guns N' Roses song, and I held that opinion for a number of years. I don't think it's true anymore, and it's not because they came out with new music that was better than, it's just other songs that have risen in my esteem since then, but You Could Be Mine is still one of my favorite Guns N' Roses songs. I love that driving force that song has. It really just kind of gets me going.
At the time, I really, really liked that song. It hasn't really aged well. It's really not that heavy. Like, I always thought that it was like, it's really heavy. It's really not that heavy of a song. So it's okay, but I mean, it's still probably a top 10 Guns N' Roses song, but I wouldn't have it number 1. Like Patience, November Rain, and fucking all of Appetite for Destruction, still probably better. But if it comes on the radio, I don't skip it. I listen to it. Or the radio.
The radio. What is what? Yeah.
When it comes on the radio, Bach. Like if it gets thrown into a Spotify playlist via the algorithm, or because I'm talking about it and it hears me talking about it and puts it. So later on today, whenever it puts it in one of my playlists, I'll listen to it. It's still a jam for sure.
And I miss those like absolute killer songs that used to be on soundtracks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we get that every now and then, but not nearly as it used to be part of the marketing for a movie. Was the soundtrack with it, right? Crow, even like Godzilla had
the Wallflowers
Matthew
cover
Broderick
Heroes, for instance. Yeah. Honestly,
like Rage Against the Machine was on that.
Oh,
But like,
yeah.
I mean, it's freaking crazy. Like, it was good stuff. No Shelter by Rage Against the Machine, which by the way was not on any album. You could only get that song via the Godzilla soundtrack. I mean, really, really cool stuff. But yeah, they don't do this stuff anymore.
Yeah, and that was actually the first time I heard Heroes, was the Wallflowers cover of Heroes, because I wasn't that familiar with the Bowie discography. So I went back to Bowie afterwards, and there was some cognitive dissonance. So for a while there, I was like, this doesn't sound enough like the Wallflowers. I don't like this as much as the Wallflowers.
Yeah.
And then eventually I came to my senses.
I'm the same way with Meat Puppets, Plateau, and Lake of Fire, that I heard the songs first via Nirvana Unplugged, and now I've kind of like, now look, Nirvana's version of it are freaking amazing. But if you're used to hearing that version, you will not like the Meat Puppets version. The Meat Puppets are a very unique act, right? So why the f- are we talking about this? We are going. Is this a cursing podcast or not?
This is not a cursing podcast. But the last time there was still plenty of cursing, and I was able to navigate that, so we'll be okay.
Okay, well, we're not going to do that this time.
Okay. The next thing is, especially after laying the soundtrack into the previous episode covering John and Sarah Connor's story, that probably got us taken off of Spotify. So I'll have to see what I can do about that. It makes me even more mad because having put the Brad Fiedel score in there, it is so inferior to the original 1984 Terminator score that he did. It's so much less interesting. Like, it's boring. It's just straight up boring. It just, for much of it, sounds just like generic score music with, a few sequences that kind of lift things up. It wasn't worth the copyright strike and the problems it's going to give me with getting the podcast out there. It wasn't worth it. Brad Fiedel was not worth it the second time around.
RoboCop theme better than Terminator theme.
I disagree,
Just
but
saying.
both of them are vastly superior to the Terminator 2 theme.
Okay, we can agree there.
In fact, I would say that probably the RoboCop sequels scores are better than the Terminator 2 score for the most part.
I don't know if I remember if they were any different or not.
There's a lot
I'm thinking of that.
on the original
Dun 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 dun.
Oh, yeah.
Dun 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 dun. Excellent.
Yeah, again, we have the RoboCop backups on this show. I've been listening to that music a lot. It's still, it picks you up. It's good music. So now we can dive into the comics.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, T2, Future War, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Nuclear Twilight #1 was released on November 24th, 1995, lending credit to my choice to cover it after Cybernetic Dawn, released a week prior. Ending this month were Dark Horse's Star Wars, Empire's End, DC's Judge Dredd and Legends of the Law, Marvel's Gargoyles, Maximum Press Battlestar Galactica, and Valiant's Magic, The Gathering Antiquities War. Released in trade paperback were Beavis and Butthead, Wanted, Batman vs. Predator 2 Blood Match, and classic Star Wars, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. My comic shop copy reads, working closely with James Cameron and Lightstorm Productions, this series features the return of John Connor. In the future, Connor struggles to win the war against the machines. As he flashes back to the first day he and the other survivors ascended from a fallout shelter to the first encounter with a death-wielding army of Terminators, John tries to piece together the rest of the game he must play to destroy Skynet. Written by Mark Paniccia. Art by Gary Erskine. Cover price $2.50. As mentioned last month, the greedy little piglets at Marvel did not make their Heroes World distribution sales numbers known. If anyone was able to deduce sales figures or top rankings, I'd love to hear about it. I bet Comicron would be all ears as well.
And, unfortunately, we had a gap between in both of us. Neither one of us has gone back and reread this comic book. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. But I did go back to my notes. You said you were struggling to understand what your notes were.
I don't know. We can get through it. But so just to reset, right, we had Cybernetic Dawn and Nuclear Twilight, two books that take place at two different times in the Terminator universe that hilariously counted up 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they were coming out at the same time each month, and they culminated in a 0 issue. And part of the 0 issue was to wrap up Cybernetic Dawn, and the other part of the 0 issue was to wrap up Nuclear Twilight. We've made the comment before, why the heck didn't it go 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 0? We do not understand who made this decision. They were not intelligent. But that's where we're at. So this podcast, we're going to talk about Nuclear Twilight 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that part of 0 that is the 5th issue. Correct.
There was an incorrect statement in the midst of all that.
Okay.
The part about them coming out at the same time. They were scheduled to come out at the same time. This book did not come out on a timely basis. This book lost the schedule fairly early on. And so that Zero issue that concluded everything got pushed back again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So no, they did not come out at the same time, unfortunately, especially for the people who wanted to wrap up the stinking first miniseries, had to wait like an extra 3 or 4 months to get the Zero conclusion, because that book came out on time. This book did not come out on time.
Wow. Okay, good. I'm glad I have that context, because that makes it even more annoying.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna try and pull off an event like this, you cannot screw this up. Like, you cannot have one of the two books be late, especially the fact, because they share, you know what I mean? There's a culminating, it's shared final issue. You cannot do this. Ridiculous.
Well, and it's funny too, because thankfully one of our listeners, Billy Hines, is a G.I. Joe guy, which is funny because he's English, living in Scotland, but he's a G.I. Joe guy, or an Action Force guy, I guess who would be. And so he was listening to some of those podcasts. Rod Wiggum is a guy who did a bunch of G.I. Joe stuff back in the day. And of course, he did that miniseries we read on.
Here's another story. Where I came riding in at the last minute and saved the Maiden. Malibu was going to do a Terminator miniseries, and it was going to start literally right at the end of Terminator 2. The first page of the first issue is Sarah Connor and John Connor driving down the highway at night, and Malibu had one of their guys, I don't know his name, but a superhero guy, and they sent it to Jim Cameron and the people that work with Jim Cameron, and they said, "What is this crap?" And so the people at Malibu said, "Well, would you maybe do a couple of sample?" I had not realized how many times I had pulled people's asses out of the fire. Oh my God. So I did a 2-page sequence of Sarah Connor and John Connor driving down the highway as if right at the end of Terminator 2, the story keeps going. And there was a 2-page sequence. They drive up on a trailer, and one of Sarah Connor's old, underground contacts comes out and threatens them with a gun. So okay, sent it to them. James Cameron and the people there went, "Oh, okay, this is okay. You can do it now." So that's kind of funny. Yeah, they couldn't have just picked me to begin with, So, God, I don't even know what the hell story I was telling.
They wouldn't want him on a project, or he'd have to audition for a project instead of getting an immediate green light. And he would always end up having to replace somebody who didn't get the job done, because he would get it done and get it done on time. And sure enough, his part was coming out on time, and the other one not so much. So he saved Nuclear Dawn, or what was it? Nuclear Dawn? What was it called?
Nuclear Twilight.
Well, this is
Cybernetic Dawn.
Cybernetic Dawn. So he saved Cybernetic Dawn. There was nobody to save Nuclear Twilight, unfortunately.
God, yes.
At least in terms of timeliness. So
that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So looking at the first issue's cover is by Rob Pryor, and it's interesting because we lose Rob Pryor partway through the other miniseries, the one that came out on time, but the one that was delayed has covers by him for all of the issues except for Zero. So the first cover, though, is kind of an easy one, kind of a gimme, because he's essentially taking an image from the trailer to Terminator 2.
From the movie.
It's the endoskeleton against the fire, which is an image we've seen repeated many times over the course of these Terminator comic books. But I think it does a pretty good job at doing a thing that a whole bunch of people have already done.
Agreed. I like the image. It looks good.
And then we open up the book with that clearly computer-colored Earth type thing, nuclear Earth, I guess that's supposed to be, or an irradiated Earth. But it's just so funny to see those really obvious computer colors. And then we have the 2-page spread where we're seeing the immediate post-Judgment Day aftermath. And it's hard not to notice that John Connor and Danny and Blythe Dyson have not aged. So my question is, have we ever figured out for sure when the movie Judgment Day takes place? Because obviously John is older than he's supposed to be, because you've got a 1984 movie. The original is 84. We've confirmed that that's 1984 many times over within the movie itself. We know that's set in 1984, but he's got to be at least 11 years old in 1991, so it obviously can't be 1991, despite when the movie was made. But I'm wondering if this isn't actually closer to 95, 96, and that's why he hasn't aged that much between the end of the movie and the start of the miniseries. Like, because I know Judgment Day is in 97, so I'm kind of thinking that maybe he might have actually supposed to have been a little bit older than the actor based on what the comic book's doing, because he looks like the same kid in the post-Judgment Day Holocaust.
Okay, so strap in for this one. Don't think about it. That's what I did. Like, obviously, this kid looks like John Connor, right? Like from the movie, but Judgment didn't happen in the movie, right? You know what I mean? Like, he would have aged. He should be probably, when this comic book opens, you would think he would be like in his early 20s or something, right? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but instead he looks exactly as he did in Cybernetic Dawn, right? You know what I mean? And I get they're trying to do, the two books are related, but if you start really thinking about the time and years, it's even with, like you said, with the two movies, it starts to be like, wait, what? This kid's not old enough, or he's too old. You know what I mean? It gets weird. This is what you play with time travel, you get burned by time travel, I guess.
And you're probably right too, because it's specifically Blythe, the younger sister, is very young. So 6 months make a huge difference in development, much less a year, much less 2 years. And she's the exact same little girl. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm not even going to try.
Doesn't make any sense. That 2-page splash is good looking though.
Yeah, it's not too bad. The likenesses suffer even worse in this miniseries though. Like, these people, not only are they not accurate likenesses, but they are not kind likenesses.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I could. They were bad in the last one too. I don't know. Across the board, let's not do likenesses on this stuff. Like, they should stop. I mean, Sarah Connor looks okay. I mean, but she's just kind of drawn as a girl with blonde hair.
Yeah.
They're not like and really it's the haircuts. The dude nails the haircuts here in these first couple of pages. Everything else is kind of a mess.
Yeah. Well, and especially on the splash, you can tell that somebody either intentionally made it more movie accurate, or somebody just went in there and fixed the faces on the splash, because he looks different in the rest of the pages. You know. So.
Oh yeah, you're right. Now when you zoom in on John, he looks different.
Yeah. The other thing that gets me is, again, we're supposed to be reading these miniseries side by side, but the Detective Mossberg character in Cybernetic Dawn, I'm not even sure. I guess he is in the first issue, but like, for having him be this prominent in the 2-page spread of the other miniseries, I guess it would clue you in to pay attention to him in the first miniseries. But I really don't think you would understand what the heck that, like, I don't even think I would have caught that was the same guy from the other miniseries from this series. You know, like, who is this guy? This guy's not somebody who's going to stand out for you and be like, oh, that's the guy from that other miniseries that has the cop partner. I don't know who's even looking for that.
Yeah, but they're only this age for like the first few pages, and then you fast forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is just showing you there was a link to the other book that's coming out at the same time, and at some point they're going to converge. But I think it's they count the 2-page spread. That's 2 pages, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. On the 10th page, we're now farther in the future with like grown up John Connor with a scarred face, right? I don't think we ever go back to the kid at that point, right?
We do. It's going to happen toward the end of the miniseries. We'll touch on that.
Yeah, towards the end. But I'm saying for the other 4 issues, you got 9 pages. So we like the cop guy's not there in the rest of the series or whatever. It's mostly about Danny Dyson and
no, the cop guy's throughout the miniseries. Actually,
is he? Then that means I didn't notice that was the cop,
right? Because he's the heavyset old general guy who's throughout the miniseries, the white-haired guy.
Oh, no chance that I remember that was that cop. Never, not 1 minute did I think that.
I got to tell you though, you're a girl in this future. If you're a girl in this future, you're screwed, because none of those women managed to make it. All the boys make it. What the hell's that about?
Yeah.
What we do we've got Mossberg, but he's still a fairly background character. He's just around. The main 2 that we're concerned about, because we recognize them, are of course going to be John Connor and Danny Dyson. And this is of course the John Connor from the future Flash 4s from T2. And it's basically them preparing for the final assault against Skywatch. And also we've got these secondary characters, Sammy Samuel and Griffith, who are just like a couple of knucklehead soldiers who are bopping around. They're the ones who figure out, or they're the ones who, for no particularly good reason, decide to go into Danny Dyson's like private study where he's working, and they see that he's been working with a T-800 Skull doing something like trying to rewrite the Cyberdyne system or Skynet programming, and they freak out over it, and that kind of haunts much of the miniseries, and you think it's going to be a driving factor in the miniseries, not so much though.
Yeah, these are the 2 main things to take away from the first issue. A Terminator turns off. It just goes dark, and like this whole like crew of John Connor's people are like around it, and they're like, "What do we do? We like take it? What do we do?" And then it blips back on and like murders them all. But John's like, "Why did that happen?" Like there seems to be some event that they're not getting the connection. I think they even referenced they've seen this now a few times and they can't figure out why. Why do these things keep turning off briefly? And how do we take advantage of it? And then, as you said, the two guys that sneak into Danny's office and they see, I think it's on one of his computer screens. It even says like loading Skynet or tap to load Skynet or whatever. Like they're foreshadowing that there is some sort of Skynet related software in their base, which kind of freaks the guys out.
Yeah, and I do think that this is an instance where the guy who's writing the miniseries, who was a big Terminator fan, it's why he got to like edit and write one of the miniseries, is because he was such a super fan. I have to think that he was reading the Now stuff because that was something that they dealt with in that time period, but was not from the movies, is events occurring that would allow the Terminators to randomly shut off. That's the thing that happens a bunch in the Now series. I don't remember if it happened. I don't think it happened in the Dark Horse stuff, at least not at this point, but it happened in the Now series and it's not from the movies. So I do think that was an influence there. I do wonder whether or not the head that they're using to get the programming out of, if that perhaps inspired the work that was done in the Terminator Zero anime series that would, run by Americans. Yeah. It could have influenced if they'd gone in there and read this stuff, but it could just as easily be that's just an obvious thing to do. So they just both have parallel thinking. But I do wonder if maybe this comic did inspire that.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that connection until you just mentioned it. I kind of forgot about that, the anime. Terminator Zero, sort of moved on past that one, forgot about it.
Yeah, they're going to do another season at some point, or that's been threatened at least.
Well, that's not really, it's not what I want to hear.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, T2, Nuclear Twilight number 2, was released on December 28, 1995, now at a 2-week remove from Cybernetic Dawn. It's hard for me to believe because nobody at the comic shop I worked at was ordering it, but the 38th and final issue of the English translation of Akira was released this month by the Epic imprint. Also ending this month were Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog's Buddy Tales, Dark Horse's Doc Savage, Curse of the Fire God, Star Wars, Droids and River of Chaos, and Tex Avery's Droopy, and Marvel's Earthworm Jim. Available copy reads, "The War of the Machines continues as the soldiers of the future attempt to stop the terrifying reign of Skynet. John Connor and crew try to protect the one Terminator that can stop the ultimate computer from exterminating the human race."
Issue 2.
Let's address the cover before we get into the story.
Oh, yeah. It's like a hunter-killer exploding. We got Terminators, and we have Reese, a fairly real-life accurate version of Reese overlooking the destruction.
Yeah, I like that cover, and it was definitely in contention for being the album art for the podcast. I ended up not going that way because I didn't think it was enough of a reflection of what happens in the miniseries. But I liked seeing that Michael Biehn likeness accurate version of Kyle. And I do think that there's a bit of Kyle Reese erasure because he's dead at the end of the first movie. They don't really do a lot with him in any of the miniseries. And so it's kind of nice that he's here, but it's also a bit frustrating because I tend to forget that he's there because inside the comic, he looks nothing like Michael Biehn. And so many of these guys are like more or less dressed the same, look the same. It's hard to tell the various grunts apart in the resistance, the human resistance. So a little frustrating.
Okay, so this whole second issue is John wanting to go and capture one of these T-800s when the power's out. And of course, Reese is one of their best soldiers, so he's on the mission. And of course, our John Connor knows why Reese can't go on these kind of missions, but nobody else does. John kind of is looking at the lineup of dudes that are basically going to get sacrificed and murdered. And he's all like, "No, Kyle, you're out. You're pulling, go do like desk duty or whatever," which of course pisses him off. He sneaks out as like a driver of the crew, and while they're out searching for one of these turned off Terminators, the hunter killers ambush the team.
The closing splash page makes it appear as though Kyle Reese is dead. They definitely set you up to think that, oh no, have they played with time?
Yeah. So they're like all over it. The hunter killers come and ambush them and like literally blow up everything. And then I think Reese is about to get the T-800, and then it comes back to life and grabs him by the throat. And you think dude might be dead. There's also, they send some Terminators back in time in this one too, right? Or they?
I don't think it's in this issue, is it? Maybe it is.
Yeah, page 15.
That's going to be more relevant as we progress.
Yeah, not a big deal. It's just like some foreshadow, some Terminators walking onto a platform, whatever. So it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Definitely not the main point of this issue. The main point was Reese sneaking out on a suicide mission and then the suiciding actually happening.
Yeah.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, T2, Nuclear Twilight number 3, was released on February 8, 1996, now a full 4 weeks after Cybernetic Dawn number 3. I'm starting to figure out why the Combination Zero issue shipped months late. Since we skipped January entirely, I'll note the endings of Archie's Street Sharks and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles adventures, Dark Horse's Star Wars, Tales of the Jedi, The Sith War, DC's near 7-year mission producing original Star Trek comics in its current volume, ditto Star Trek, The Next Generation ongoing and TNG, Ill Wind miniseries, Malibu's Star Trek, Deep Space Nine wrapping after nearly 3 years, Marvel's Barbie after 5 years, and Valiant's Magic, The Gathering Wayfarer. Now we can move on to the terminated titles of February 1996, including ending this month were Archie's Hanna-Barbera All-Stars, Marvel's Saban's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Ninja Rangers VR Troopers, Maximum Press Battlestar Galactica, The Enemy Within, and Topps Jason vs. Leatherface and Return to Jurassic Park. Available copy reads, inside the mind of the ultimate computer, Skynet, in a nanosecond, Synod attempts to devise a foolproof plan to ensure its survival on the planet. Weakened by the human resistance and on waning reserve power, the world's most powerful computer fights to stay alive while John Connor and crew decide to destroy its complex.
So issue 3 is another Rob Pryor painting, and this one's interesting because you actually get the likeness of Robert Patrick.
Yep.
So we're seeing, so we're getting a lot of backfill on what's going to, like, this is clearly a prequel to Terminator 2, where the other one was a sequel, which is funny because they take place after, or it's wibbly wobbly timey wimey, because it's a prequel to the story that's going to, it's very, very Planet of the Apes, actually, when you think about it, because everything has to go back in time to get to this point. Yeah, yada, yada, yada. So we see the seemingly killed Kyle Reese on the ground, and then we see one of the human resistance fighters crawling toward him, and that's clearly the basis for the T-1000 that's going to be in Judgment Day, and in the background there's a hunter killer striking.
Yeah, pretty good cover. It's not bad.
Yeah, I liked it pretty well. It was in contention too, but again, the figure for the T-1000 guy is way too far in the background, and it just didn't look good as an album, so I passed on it.
Gotcha. All right, let me go through my notes here on this one. All right, Reese is obviously the last one left. John freaks out because they're like, oh, hey, your whole team got wiped out. And it sounds like Reese was in the squad. And he's like, what? Because he's got daddy issues.
And the picture of him starts to disappear in his wallet. So that's
it does the yeah, exactly. So he sends all these search parties, which kind of people are freaking out. Like, wait, why are you sending all these people to die for one dude? Like, you didn't mind killing all these other people, but you don't mind sending Kyle Reese. Like, Kyle Reese is you're drawing the line, right? So one guy gets captured by Skynet. It's the Robert Patrick looking guy. Gets captured by Skynet. And it's one of the dudes that snuck into Dyson's office, right?
Yeah, these knuckleheads. And what's funny is, again, you think that them knowing about them working on the Terminator head, and they're arguing amongst themselves about telling the other guys, and you figure it's going to be this whole big thing where they tell the wrong person, it causes all these complications. But actually what happens is the black guy gets killed, and the white guy, Griff, gets chokeholded by a T-800 and then dragged to the Terminator headquarters. It amounts to something, but I'm not sure what that something is. So it's just sort of almost a red herring.
No, it's the big twist at the end of the book. It's the whole twist at the end of the book, because they torture him, and he tells why they tortured this guy. I mean, I know they're trying to get information about where the resistance people are and stuff, so that's why. But he tells them everything. I think he even tells them hey, they're working on a Skynet. They're working on they've got a T. I think he tells them everything, and then they kill the guy, and then obviously the T-1000 assumes this guy's identity. So he's like I
want to draw an underline. A T-1000 assumes his identity.
Yes,
I think this is going to be important later on.
Right. That's issue 3.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, T2, Nuclear Twilight number 4 was released on April 24th, 1996. That's 2.5 months after the previous issue, which came out the same month that Cybernetic Dawn halted release until the now clearly ill-considered conjoined finale could take place. You have to admit, it's kind of funny that after all those years at small publishers, it was a big dog like Marvel that blew the schedule this badly. Again, we missed March entirely, which saw the conclusion of Dark Horse's Indiana Jones and the Sargasso Pirates, Marvel's Saban's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers number 7, Maximum Press Battlestar Galactica, Starbuck, Millennium's and Rice's The Witching Hour, and top space, above and beyond. This was also the launch month for a second volume of Archie's Street Sharks, Dark Horse's Barbed Wire Comics Magazine Special, and Star Wars, Tales from Mos Eisley, DC's Life, The Universe and Everything, and Valiant's Dak and Blackblade on the World of Magic, The Gathering, and Sliders. Joining the stands with Nuclear Twilight #4 were Dark Horse's Tex Avery's Comics and Stories, and DC's Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Leaving ahead of the miniseries conclusion were Marvel's Conan and Conan the Savage, marking the end of their decades-long association with the property. Available copy reads, John Connor and crew have infiltrated Skynet's complex and are ready to pull the plug, but the dying machine has one last proverbial breath left, and it's enough to threaten everything the human resistance has worked towards. The ultimate computer may yet exterminate the human race. Continued in Terminator 2 Cybernetic Dawn #0.
Let me finish up my notes here. So Dyson's ready to swap a chip into a newly acquired T-800. John tells the crew to protect the T-800 as they try and sneak into Skynet, even if they have to kill humans trying to destroy it. Guess what happens? So there's like rogue dudes coming around. So there's, you know what I mean? Like it's the Judgment Day, it's the end of the world. So there are also bad people out there. But it's also even like if other teams of resistance fighters see a T-800 and they try and blow it up, you are to kill them to protect the T-800 because the T-800 has a very special purpose or whatever, right? The Trojan horse, if you will. Then they got to start shooting humans to protect a Terminator, which is this twist.
They get into that more in issue 4, and that one has a cover of the scarred John Connor sort of as a spectral figure overlooking the battlefield with resistance fighters engaged in the future war, which is a little tricky because we've been treated to a lot of very familiar faces up to this point. And you get the 4th issue, which, it's the 4th issue, it's the final part, more or less, so it doesn't matter that much, but it makes it clear to me that I don't know what John Connor as an adult looked like. I know there's a dark-haired guy with facial scars, but especially as painted on the cover, he looks kind of like Lance Henriksen. And so for a second there, I'm like, wait, is this the cop from the first movie? What's going on here? And I finally had to talk myself into, no, this is clearly John Connor, but I need the context because I don't know what that guy looks like. I just know those key characteristics to identify him. Once I'm confusing this dude until I look for those characteristics. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. It's not an immediate thing. I don't recognize John Connor, and therefore this is a cover on the stands. I'm not necessarily going to pick it up based on that cover because I don't know who this dude is.
Yeah, I gotcha. I totally agree. That is definitely a painting of somebody, and he's got the scar, so you know who he's supposed to be, but he doesn't really look like anybody. Yes.
As you said, there's the Terminator horse, and what I like about that is, especially at the beginning of this issue, they really hard sell that there are human resistance fighters that are not in on this, that are reacting to seeing a T-800 and getting blown to smithereens. And these are our good guys. These are our friends. This is friendly fire. But these guys got to die because they're in the way of the T-800 getting to Skynet, and that's what's going to save a whole bunch of other human lives. But they you see like a couple of people, and they name them, and there's a boy and a girl, and the girl dies. She's got black lipstick, so she's really hot. And then she dies, and like, oh man, they killed the black lipstick goth chick. And then like the guy catches on right at the last minute, and he's like realizing, whatever, he's quoting like Spock in Wrath of Khan or some variation on that, where it's like, okay, I know what I'm dying for at least, and then he gets splattered. But it hits you kind of hard because like, yeah, these guys are being sacrificed. These are pawns in this game, and you feel bad because these are also human lives being wasted. But I'm glad they took the time to elaborate on that.
Yeah, it was let me see, we can't curse here. It was a really flopped up moment, but one that's like, they should have these kind of moments in these comic books. So like, this is not a happy story. There's no rays of sunshine, having to sacrifice the few for the good of the many. And, it's just like a brutal way to do it. But it was effective. I'm not saying I really like that part of the comic book, but I thought it was effective. I didn't see it coming. I was like, surely they're not going to actually someone's going to go over there and explain or whatever, It's like, no, you can't do this. There's no time for that. We got to kill all these people. And nobody was happy about it, especially the dead people. But the people having to kill them was like, this is messed up. This is insane.
Since Kyle Reese has survived, he's back at the base, and once again they're like, Kyle, you need to stay back. And he's like, no, I'm a soldier, man. I'm going to get out there and help out some more. So of course he's insubordinate. He's endangering himself, and they do draw that parallel between Kyle continuing to not do what he's told and being a hero to when John John was younger and he blows up a T-800 toward the beginning of the miniseries, and his mom was like, "You can't be doing that. You're the leader of the free, human race." And he's like, "Yeah, but Mom, right now there's a T-800. I got to kill it. I can't just let you guys die." And so you can see the father-son parallel there. And the story's even called Father's Day. So you can see that insubordination on Reese's part is a family tradition.
Yeah, we're recording this on Father's Day Eve.
And we'll release it the day after. How do you like that?
There we go. And then, like, as Reese is out, he's about to get murdered by a T-800 because that's what happens whenever you get out there. And right when he's about to die, the virus from the Trojan horse T-800 gets uploaded, and, all the hunter killers start crashing, and the T-800 that's about to kill him, the lights go out and blip out. And then there's like this shot of John, who is like, "We finally did it." He's like down on his knees because he's so, let me see, what does he say here? "I was overwhelmed with emotion, even thought I knew there was more, much more for all of us to do, for Reese to do. But all I wanted was a moment of silence of the skies," or something like that. I don't know. I'm sort of skimming it here.
Well,
but anyway,
you have that one moment too when Kyle gets a hold of the rifle that the T-800 was holding, and he was talking about how Sarah must be watching over me.
Yeah.
So you can see his canonization of her. She's basically like the Virgin Mary to him, essentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and he'd been staring at the photo that he had of her, earlier too. So,
And one thing that we didn't mention was that when they hacked Skynet, there was a passcode, and the passcode was easy money. And I didn't realize until I was like, at first it was like, oh, hey, my favorite Rodney Dangerfield movie. Not the reference. The reference is to what John says when they steal the money out of the ATM in the T2. So nice callback.
Yeah, so then they get into Skynet, and what time it is. They got to send Kyle Reese through time back to whatever, 19, whatever, blah, 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 for T1. There's a lot of problems, like I was saying earlier, with the time travel and everything. They do a pretty good job in this series of making sure, you can tell a Terminator fan wrote this. At some point, Kyle's got to go back, right? Even though they've quote unquote won, you got to send Kyle back so that we can win. Like, it's not we won so Kyle doesn't have to go back. You know what I'm saying?
We've been holding back this whole time. We're now going to sacrifice this particular lamb, knowing full well that this is my last day with Daddy. So it's at least John's consistent in that regard. It's like, yeah, Daddy's got to die too. We got to die. You got to die to save the future. Sorry, Pop.
Yep. And then they leave, and everything's like, hey, yeah, we got it, or whatever. And then
don't forget they had that flashback. Remember where they were saving pediatric Reese, where it's young John. They're liberating a camp and getting the humans free, and he hears a family that are the Reeses, and he's wondering if that wasn't his grandparents that he rescued, but they got lost in the tumult of everything going on if they raided that concentration camp. But one of the things he's thinking about is like, yeah, this isn't my first time with the Reeses, or like I have a history with these people in this Judgment Day period, so it's a nice deliberate flashback, plus another reminder that we get to see young John again too.
Yeah. So then they go and they send Reese back in time after that, saying goodbye to him, whatever, and then everybody's kind of outside the Skynet headquarters, celebrating and everything, and then old Griff walks up and they're like, hey man, we thought you were dead. And Griff's like, so did I. And he's like very creepily staring in the panel, because it's not Griff, it's actually the T-1000.
Yep. He reminds me so much. I remember that Jason Burroughs was the guy who did all those Warren Ellis books at Avatar, and I think it was they had one of the protagonists that looked like a creepy serial killer dude, and it looks like this was the guy that he was modeled after. Like he's got the exact same face that Jason Burroughs drew on that protagonist over and over again. But yeah, he's definitely a creepazoid and looks nothing like Robert Patrick at all, but definitely looks creepy.
Yep.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, T2, Nuclear Twilight Cybernetic Dawn #0 was released on May 8, 1996, over 2 months after Cybernetic Dawn #4, but only a couple of weeks after Nuclear Twilight #4. Each story was a mere 12 pages with a 45-cent markup on the issue, I guess charging for the spare cover. Ending this month were Dark Horse's G.I. Joe and Star Wars, Heir to the Empire, DC's Life, the Universe and Everything, Marvel's Beavis and Butthead and the Ren and Stimpy Show, and Topps Mars Attacks, Aliens vs. Predator. War got a trade paperback. Available copy reads, the flipbook conclusion to Terminator 2 Cybernetic Dawn, and Terminator 2 Nuclear Twilight. John Connor and the human resistance race against time to destroy Skynet in the future. Script by Mark Paniccia. Art by Gary Erskine. Cover price $2.50.
And then we get to the Zero, finally, months late, and it's not a Rob Pryor cover. This is a Gary Erskine painting. And I ran into a similar problem as before where I'm not recognizing anybody on this cover. And I have to intellectually remind myself, oh, that guy's name Connor on his chest, and his scars mean that's John Connor. And then he's got a black guy beside him, that must be Danny Dyson. And he's got an old white guy beside him, that must be Mossberg. But I have to completely intellectualize this. I don't recognize it with my gut. It's like I have to think about it to realize who I'm looking at on this cover. And it's an okay cover. It's got a nice sense of depth to it. It's got sort of that Glenn Fabry sort of like,
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Texture to it. But it is kind of boring though at the same time.
It is, but I do think things fully painted. There's no like CGI background in it or whatever. Like it's some like the explosions in some of the other covers were obviously like cut and pasted in or whatever. This one, it looks like they painted everything. But yeah, Glenn Fabry it's definitely not Glenn Fabry.
Right.
Definitely not.
Given, yeah.
But it's in that vein.
The Corbin inspired sense of depth, yeah. And then of course we're opening up with a bunch of T-800s that they're finding when they get into Skynet, and they're all Ken dolls. And it makes me wonder because in the previous issue we saw Kyle Reese getting slathered on with the time goo so that it creates an outline for him to be sent back in time with. And he has no Dongosaurus either. But we know he has to have one because John exists. So the question is, are these T-800s anatomically correct? Or is this just him continuing the pattern of non-nude nudity where they just take out the genitals and they just let you know these guys are clearly nude. These guys are clearly doing a Eastern Promises later on in the issue, but we're not going to actually show everything. But if they aren't anatomically correct, I wonder if that'd be another way of detecting the T-800s is you have to whip it out for you to get into their camps later on because they realize, oh, these guys ain't got no wangs. So that's how we're going to tell the cyborgs from the humans. Yeah,
I'm going to say the T-800. I mean, we know it's got a butt crack because we've seen it. And that's pretty anatomical. That's a specific anatomical purpose. So they got to have dongs. I think they just didn't. Maybe these are some of these are T799s. They added the dongs for the 800. I don't know, dude. They obviously got better over time. So I'm sure the first several they got killed when they didn't pass the whip out protocol. Then they probably added them.
They're looking at them through binoculars and they didn't have the right outline in a certain place. The package wasn't there, so the package didn't get delivered.
Yep. Well, that's a conversation we had. Yeah. So now they're walking through these aisles they're obviously all Arnold style T-800s. They have the chip. Now, this is the chip from the other series, right? That's where they got this T-800 from?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think Danny's been working on this pretty much his entire life.
Yeah, this was from the T-800 head that they stole off one of the T-800s from the prior miniseries. And I think that was what we had seen. They were sending the T-800s to whenever that series was that we saw a few issues ago. I think that's what that was from. A little hazy, but that's what it is. So they put the good T-800 chip so they sent Reese back. That's T1. Now they're going to send Arnold back for T2.
Correct. And also, because we haven't explicitly stated it, but it was determined that the reason why the Terminators were having the brownouts was because of the extraordinary power necessary to send things back through time, which explains why they don't have like whole armies going back through time, because literally they're vulnerable for a fair amount of time, minutes at least, every time they send anything back through time. So they can't just be doing that willy-nilly.
Correct. So they're trying to figure out like which T-800 do we pick? They pick the one, they stick the chip in it, and then they're going to go shove him through the portal after they turn him on. But then why does the whole line of T-800s come on?
Okay, so the T-800s come online and start killing human resistance fighters because I think that they are autonomous. They're not as directly connected to Skynet and therefore are not immediately affected by the rootkit that they've got in there. But then one of the T-800s, I don't remember if they directly put a chip in him or he's just the first affected, but he turns on the other Terminators and starts protecting the humans, and that's the version of Arnie that goes back in time.
Yeah, that's right. They had to turn the power on to all of them because they had to turn the power on to the one they needed, and then they all came on. All of them were bad except for him, right? That's what it was, I think.
Yeah. And again, these are all supposedly Arnie's, but of course the likenesses are not in place. So you have to kind of use your imagination a little bit to go like, oh yeah, all these very British looking guys are actually Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, but it's closer than probably most of the other ones.
Fair,
I mean, I could tell what they were going. So their T-800 ends up saving them, right? I'm trying to figure out how they get out, and they're all like celebrating.
Yeah, the other T-800 and combined with the human resistance fighters are able to fend off the other two 800s that were trying to kill their butts.
Correct. So then they're outside celebrating because they were able to send the T-800 back through time to be T2. And then they show at their resistance camp the T-1000 who would take over Griffith's McGriffinstein's likeness. And he's creeping around in Danny Dyson's office.
Messing around with that skull.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's the thing that I think that they're alluding to earlier on is I think that there's more than one Griff T-1000 and that the power outage that occurs when the T-800 was going to kill Reese the second time was probably the T-1000 going back to be in T2. And that's why they send the T-800 Arnie back to stop that one. But there's another second T-1000 that looks like Robert Patrick still running around in the future in the event that Malibu was going to do more miniseries, even though they didn't.
Correct. Probably.
Yeah, but and then again, it's not explicit enough to where I could say for certain that was the plan, but we still have this guy floating around. So either later on he goes back through time to screw with stuff, or there are just two T-1000s with that likeness. And since we see two T-1000s messed around with the captured real human Griff, I think it's a safe assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Without
yeah, so that was the twist that ends that episode.
Yeah.
Or that issue.
But it's not I thought it was going to be a different complication as opposed to the twist. So that's part of what threw me off.
Okay, but yeah, he knew to go look for Danny Dyson's office because Griffith McGriffinstein told them when they were torturing him before he got murdered and his likeness was assumed. So that was his whole deal. I got to get to whatever.
Yeah. And so
now look, why does he not shut off when you shut down Skynet? Why do the T? I don't know. But I don't remember. They may explain it. I don't remember specific detail that's not, I guess, totally necessary. Might be kind of necessary, but don't worry about these kind of details, people. It's the Terminator universe. They're doing the best they can.
Well, and again, the T-1000 is supposed to be an upgrade, and we don't see the T-1000s that often, so maybe they are more fully autonomous, and that's why they're not affected.
The only collection of Nuclear Twilight was released in 1996 by Box Street in the United Kingdom, charging a pence under £9 sterling. This edition was in black and white, giving me even more reason to mock the crowdsourced Terminator 40th anniversary hardcovers that only collected common stuff Dark Horse already put out in trades and omnibuses. Maybe you'll get some traction in 2031 for T2's anniversary. One of the online Terminator resources noted of Nuclear Twilight that it was an adaptation of the extended T2 script with future war scenes. Van Ling and Lightstorm Entertainment were also involved. It was published simultaneously with Cybernetic Dawn and picks up where the movie left off in the future, with Connor scanning the area. The comic book deploys all of the unused conceptual artwork from the movie, like the Los Angeles Time Displacement Equipment Complex, Skynet interiors, elevators, Terminator storage chambers, as well as in used machine designs like Silverfish and Centurions. It shows us the departure of Reese as it was in the script, and explains why only one Terminator at a time could be sent back. The activation of the TD, which was a gargantuan machine going down deep into the bowels of the Earth, required so much energy that it caused all of Skynet's machines temporary deactivation after each power-up. Cybernetic Dawn, along with Nuclear Twilight, with their guidance and involvement with Lightstorm, are arguably the best and most informed, canonically correct Terminator comic series, as it all includes James Cameron's story and designs that were dropped from T2 due to time constraints and budgetary reasons. They're both great extended universe companions to the first two movies.
Okay, what did you think about this series?
It was mostly kind of boring. Like, it was definitely okay. It was fairly well done in terms of, like, there wasn't anything about it that made me mad. There wasn't anything where I'm like, this is stupid or they messed this up or anything. But it was just sort of like, we know where this is going. It had very, very deep seated prequelitis where we know pretty much everything that's going to happen here. And so it's kind of nice to see the little twist. Oh, okay, so that's who the T-1000 was based on, yada, yada, yada. But there wasn't, like, a lot to this to launch more Terminator stories. It kind of closed the loop, and there's nothing here that makes you go, yes, I want to know what's going to happen with that other T-1000. You're just sort of like, yeah, that tells me the story that I kind of already knew in a way that was better thought out than the Now comics, for instance. But it's not, nobody's going to be begging for them to do this as a video game or to make it as a CGI prequel or anything like that. It's just, it fills in some gaps that if you're a fan, you probably want to see filled, but the general audience is probably fine with never finding out about it.
Yeah, so I wrote the exact same thing. This series, for the most part, was extremely boring with a lot of exposition. These little like these raids going after the Terminators, these are small blips in the rest of the series. The rest of it is painstakingly explaining to you. It's just no prizing or fleshing out the gaps before and after the movies. Like they're just saying, getting like, we know Reese gets sent back in time, but they have to painstakingly explain it to you. And then when he gets sent back in the issue, like, you knew he wasn't gonna die, right? So it's not really any real stakes, but that ends up being like a lot of this book, or is these stakes of, oh, where's Kyle Reese at? Oh, he snuck out. Yeah, of course he snuck out. We know everyone's gonna die except for him. And then it's, the panicking. Oh, we have to save Kyle Reese. Oh, because I know deep down I have to send him back in time because he's actually my father. We know all this already. Like, you know what I mean? It was just a lot of exposition, not a lot of action, and a lot of it's just getting us to what we already know because the end result is going to be something from a movie, right? Sending the T, we got to get this chip in a brain. Yeah, we know you're going to get it in a T-800 brain because that's Arnold, and you're going to send him back. We know it. We know what already the end of all this action sequence is getting us to. We know John Connor's not going to die. We know Kyle Reese isn't going to die. But I will say, whereas Cybernetic Dawn, since it was after T2, it was sort of like kind of just, they could kind of do whatever they wanted. With obviously, like, John Connor can't die, but that could have been the series where Sarah Connor dies. We didn't know, you know what I mean? Like, it could have, they didn't kill her there, but you knew that it was a possibility that it could happen. Like, if Danny Dyson would have died in this series, it wouldn't be the freaking end of the world. So yeah, I felt like the other series had way more going for it in terms of like actual surprises, and it was definitely more exciting. There was more action sequences. Art was definitely worse. I thought the art in this series was much better. I thought everything was just way more detailed. I thought the Terminators looked better. I thought the people looked better. This artist has a very Sean Chin-esque vibe. It reminded me of Sean Chin. I don't know if it's the way he does hair or lips or something, but all of the faces, if you told me Sean Chin had drawn, like, this is one of the first things he drew in his career, I would have been like, yeah, that sounds about right. But Sean Chin isn't exactly the most like exciting, dynamic artist ever, but he'll draw you a comic book and it'll look good. Whereas the dude who drew the first miniseries, the Cybernetic Dawn miniseries, it was pretty rough, especially because he was going like heavy with the movie accurate photo representation or photo reference, and he couldn't pull it off. Here, there's no real, like Robert, it doesn't even try to do Robert Patrick. It's the hair. He slicks the guy's hair back, and that's T-1000. Arnold's okay, like we just said. And John Connor, it's the future with the scar on his face, so he doesn't have to look like anybody. And Sarah Connor is only in the book for 3 or 4 pages total. And she's the girl with blonde hair, so we know that's Sarah Connor. So again, he seems to match hairstyles. That's what it is. He does who's the actor that played John Connor in T2? What's his name? What is this guy name? Edward Furlong. He did the Edward Furlong skater haircut, but like the kid doesn't look like Edward Furlong. He just put the hair in it, right? So he matches the hairs. That's as far as he goes with the photo reference. Whereas the other guy was like trying to do it, and it was terrible and distracting me from the story. But yeah, I totally agree. This was fairly boring. I like, outside of where they're having to protect the T-800 from actual resistance fighters, that was super messed up, and I thought that was an interesting twist. And I do like that at least they stuck to the continuity, but the parts in between, sending Reese back and sending T-800 back and everything, we find out that the original, how did Robert Patrick's face become the first T-1000? We find that out. Like, that's cool. That's like half a page of the 4 and 3/4 issue miniseries. So all those things were through it, and those things were cool, and I liked those things. The rest of it was extremely boring. So
I'm glad that they split the creative teams the way they did, because the first writing team, I think it was the writer Dan Abnett, I think it was. He was, a lot of it was like deleted scenes from the movies and deleted sequences from the scripts and everything else. But that was an exciting, propulsive script with kind of boring artwork. Whereas this had really great artwork to help carry a fairly boring story. And so if they switched that around, you'd have had one just like absolute dog turd of a miniseries, and then one pretty solid miniseries. So I'm glad they did things the way they did, where they sort of evened it out, right? But it would have been nice to have had a great miniseries and a crummy miniseries, and instead we have 2 very mediocre miniseries. And I don't think we would have ever had a really great one anyway, because even if Gary Erskine had drawn the other miniseries, it still would have essentially been deleted scenes and, well, here's what happened next, the day after, and not that much to it. It's frustrating frustrating because they make it clear that Judgment Day has not been resolved at the end of T2 because that's the sequel. That's the actual sequel. This is a prequel, and it follows the rules of a prequel. So all it's doing is setting up the first Terminator movie and the second Terminator movie, but not actually pushing the story forward at all. And it would have been kind of cool if this had been like an epic miniseries where they're telling you, like you said, well, what happened to Sarah and what happened to the other Dysons, and here's everything that happened from 1997 to 2029. And then that would have been like, oh wow, okay, this is like history of the DC universe, but for the Terminator Judgment Day sphere. But that's not that. What it is
Nope.
you know, these little, here's a quinky dink, this is how this happened, this is how this happened, this is where all these pieces fit, you know, and now you can go watch the movies and you know how we got to that point. And that's pretty dull. And I do like that they set some things up, like particularly Danny Dyson, where they've got this tech genius who's this chip off the old block, and he's pretty well built, and he's been working in secret on all these plots that really, when you think about it, Danny's the one who saves humanity. He's protected by John Connor. John Connor's the one who keeps the humans moving, and he's the one who executes the plan. But Danny Dyson's the Oppenheimer here. He's the guy who actually ends the war, because he's the one who comes up with the thing that takes out Skynet. So it's interesting because you do set up a situation where Danny could potentially be the hero later on. And it's actually, I think that's one of the problems with the Terminator franchise that I've been thinking about over the course of the series. Who is the protagonist of this franchise? Because in the first movie, really, it's Kyle Reese, but he dies. In the second movie, it should probably be John Connor, and or if not John, then Sarah Connor, but really the protagonist is the T-800 that's been programmed to save them. And he's dead at the end of the second movie. So by the third movie, you should either have Sarah Connor fully the protagonist, but they've killed her off. Spoilers. So then this needs to be John, but John has let his skills lapse and he's not continuing to do anything. So once again, it's another T-800 that's been sent back, going up against a supposed improvement on the T-1000, but really isn't. And so it's really just a retread of the second movie. And amongst these movies, you don't really have a protagonist because, again, the T-800 that we're supposed to fall in love with and been the daddy figure is dead in the second movie. And then you have like second daddy in the third movie. And you've got this much diminished John Connor and no Sarah Connor at all. So when you think about how this franchise has struggled to move past T2, one of the main problems is that we don't have a protagonist to follow. And as much as I love Sarah Connor, in the first movie, she's just a survivor. She's a person who's mostly being protected by Kyle Reese throughout the movie. In the third act, she starts to step up. She's working on the pipe bombs. She's the one who actually terminates the last Terminator. And you see her evolve into the second movie where she's a much tougher character, but she's still not the savior. She's always like the person who's helping out the T-800 to the degree that she's capable of. And then you have the whole tangent with her going after Miles Dyson and not taking him out. So she essentially fails at that mission. And going after Miles Dyson and him dying does not actually stop Judgment Day, as we see in the sequel comics. So she's not like Ellen Ripley, where she has a dark fate, but she still accomplishes things in each chapter of the story. And she's clearly the protagonist of the first three Aliens movies. This franchise doesn't have a protagonist. And everyone that's sort of the protagonist dies at the end of that particular movie. So how do you have a franchise continue on when the narrative doesn't make sense? Because there's no way to stop Judgment Day because it's always hinging on John Connor being born, which means that somebody from Judgment Day has to come back to sire him. So there's no way of getting saving the day. And the third movie should probably just be like the future war, at least, so we can see those parts. But again, it's somewhat redundant because unless it takes place after 2029 and thus admits the failure of John Connor because they're still dealing with Terminators, you're not progressing the narrative. And so this story sets up doing stuff after 2029 because we've seen, okay, so there is the T-1000 still active after the fall of Skynet, so they're not completely beaten yet. And you still have like John Connor and Danny Dyson and then this stupid cop guy who's like, why are you even here, right? He doesn't amount to anything, but he's still around at least. So you have like a setup for future stories, but it's not a compelling setup and it doesn't really jive with the movies. So the only thing that moves the narrative forward is the sequel comic that we've already read, thinking it was a prequel to this story, but this story is a prequel to everything. And so nothing really does anything. Nothing really goes anywhere. So it's a very frustrating situation where even if it's good, it's not good enough to actually get any traction under this franchise, which is going to be a problem for the movies as well.
Yeah. You can't, I understand you want it to be this everything's hopeless, right? So even when you get your hopes up, something good's about to happen, you know that whatever, it's the opposite of Jurassic Park's Earth or Life Finds a Way. It's like the other way. Humanity, we are doomed. We're doomed, and no matter what, every time you think they're gone, oh, we did it this time. No, the T-1000 finds its way into the Dyson's place and restarts. You know what I mean? It's like it's this weird thing. But at some point, that just gets kind of tired. And if it's going to go on forever, well, then, like you said, even if you had a protagonist, at some point that protagonist is going to die because it's this recycled. Like, is it really John Connor leads them because John Connor has a son or daughter, and they 30 years later after John Connor dies, you know what I mean? Like, you just got to keep stretching it out. But if there is never truly any resolution to defeating Skynet, just have them win. You got to end the series. You know what I mean? Because you're like you said, who do we root for? I don't understand who we root for anymore. It's too circular. It's too cyclical, where everything comes back and the world has to end over and over and over again. At some point, you're like, okay, well then, what are we watching this for or reading about it for? So
yeah, or you could, maybe John Connor has to police the future, but again, he has to still be conceived, and so he's an albatross around the neck of the franchise. But on top of that, well, what's the alternative? The dirtiest word, the word that they have to use for Terminator Zero: multiverse. We've got to do parallel timelines, and then then nothing matters because there's a timeline where they save the day. There's a timeline where they fail. There's so we're just watching a multiverse thing. We're watching a what if, and none of it is real. None of it matters. And really, that's what the franchise ends up happening is we've got all these movies that are supposed to be continuations that invalidate one another. They cannot coexist. So that's what happens is it became a multiverse. And the same way that it screwed Marvel cinematic universe, it screws the Terminator before, and Terminator tells you don't do this, but they did it anyway. Multiverses ruin the narrative. So you have to commit to something. So what are you going to commit to? How does John Connor continue to exist? Or does John Connor continue to exist? If he doesn't exist, then what happens then? And mostly what it comes down to is we're screwed. The whole world gets blown up, just different ways.
Are you ready to get triggered? Do you want to know who the protagonist is? The best protagonist for the series?
Go for it.
It's Alex Murphy.
Yeah, actually, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, honestly.
Nope.
The best continuation and the person who ultimately saves the day in the best sequel is Alex Murphy, RoboCop.
100%.
You just
Alex Murphy.
You validated it was almost like to some degree I've actually kicked myself. It's like, why did I commit to doing all this RoboCop stuff as the backup feature for these Terminator coverage? I don't have the interest in RoboCop that I have in Terminator. But you're right. He's the hero. RoboCop is the hero of the story. He's the one who fixes the timelines and saves the day and has the best sequel to any. It's easily the best sequel to any of the Terminator stuff that we've seen. I've liked some of the movies, but that is the best sequel. If they'd made that movie, it would have rocked.
He's the most sympathetic character. He's the one you can root for, and he's the one who has the ability to get it done believably.
And given the nature of the RoboCop sequels, he needs the win too. Like Terminator franchise needs the win, RoboCop needs the win. Let RoboCop beat the Terminators and save the day and be the hero of mankind.
Yeah, and then find some way to make John Connor be in there briefly to assist RoboCop before he gets gunned down and is killed, right? Like, so you could say, well, no, John Connor still did save because he's the reason. Like, if you want to keep your little continuity in check there, but like, other than that, like you said, like none of these people are like real. I mean, Sarah in the second one, you get rooting for. She was like this damsel in distress in the first movie. She's such a badass in the second movie. You're kind of rooting for her, but she is a complete psychopath. She's in no shape to become like I want my little girl to look up to Sarah Connor. Like, that's not going to happen. She's a lunatic.
Yeah. Honestly, that's part of the fun though. Like, I've watched a little bit of the Sarah Connor Chronicles. I got a few episodes into it before I just didn't have time to fool with it. And I'll go back to it again because I've heard good things about that. I've heard it's better than any of the movie sequels. But part of the problem is that the Sarah Connor in that is just kind of a ball buster, but she's not a total psycho. And Sarah Connor is way more interesting when you don't know what she's going to do, where she's just this loose cannon who might go off and kill Miles Dyson. And you're like, Mom, no, what are you doing? You need that because that's part of what makes her an interesting character. Her big speech about how mankind will always destroy it because you don't know how to truly create. That's what I want Sarah Connor to do. I want her to have that kind of perspective where, I'm saying she's crazy. And yeah, she's kind of crazy objectively. But also under the circumstances, she's kind of right still. Like if she had followed through with killing Miles Dyson, that we wouldn't have, because we wouldn't have found out that Cyberdyne had all that stuff. So they still need him alive. But that's a more logical action than not killing him, right? And she's right. mankind continues to destroy. The whole premise of this franchise is mankind will not stop destroying itself and will always find newer, better ways to kill each other and end themselves. So she's not wrong necessarily. It's just a very skewed perspective and an uncommon perspective and a radicalized perspective. But that's what makes her interesting. And we need a character like that. And we don't have it after T2. Everybody's sort of like, oh, well, we got to go save the future again. Oh, no, we got to fight the machine guys again. There's nobody who's throwing things off kilter the way that she does in that movie.
Yeah. It's like, for all the reasons we love Sarah Connor, that's the reason why she can't be she's not the real protagonist. Like, she's just not. You got to keep her psycho crazy. She's got a future PTSD. Like, she's got PTSD from stuff that hasn't even happened to her yet, right. But she knows it's good. You know what I mean? Like, it's bizarre. But those are not the that's the workings of your supporting character, not of your lead.
That's why instead of killing off Sarah Connor, you continue to have John Connor and her interacting with each other, which is what they do in the Sarah Connor Chronicles. So maybe that's one of the reasons why people like that so much. The only problem I had watching that is you have an older John Connor who's still a wimp, and I really need John Connor to man up by the time he's a teenager. It's okay for the whiny at 11 because he's still kind of for 11-year-old. He's a pretty tough kid. You know, he's getting some stuff done. He's running around on the dirt bike and everything else. He's doing a really good job for an 11-year-old. But by the time he's 15, 16, he's child soldier at that point. We need to see that John Connor and not continue to be the Hasta La Vista kid.
Well, we all knew. Look, it was the 80s. We all knew a kid who grew up who had a flannel shirt and rode a dirt bike.
Yeah.
John Connor in T2 was not. Nowadays, he would be this insane like aberration into terrorizing a city. All of us had some form of John Connor in us. He was a very relatable kid in 1991 or whatever.
He is a Generation X hero, period. He's so Gen X.
Yeah, even with the absentee crazy mom. Like that. Like, I was like, I know that guy. It's unfortunate. I still very much enjoy T1 and T2, and I just kind of ignore everything after that. And these books kind of fall. It's the source material they're having to work with. It just inherently, you're never going to have this satisfying resolution. And it was just funny because like one was this action-packed blockbuster series. The other one was like it's like, you're talking about earlier, if you would find some way to put the creative teams together, you could have made a really good book. If you could have put the vibes together, you had one that was kind of, although very movie based, was this action-packed perpetual, we're running from Terminator, which is the good stuff where you're running from Terminators and you're trying to like scavenge and survive. And the second was this is like procedural, walk through.
It's a text
too many
scroll.
words.
The miniseries is a text scroll. It's like a Star Wars text scroll, but it's a miniseries. And also the problem is you had a super fan who had access to Lightspeed, James Cameron's company, and his resources. And the miniseries is full of design stuff that was not used in the movies. So it's like, oh, this is the elevator that we designed, and this is the type of Terminator you get to see the movies, but we designed it. And you like see Erskine like faithfully recreating the design elements. So that's what this was about. This was about, we did the thing. Hey, remember when you read the book, The Art of Terminator, and they had the thing and it looked cool? Well, this is us doing the thing in a story now. It's like, okay, great, but it's really just for the fans. It's nothing here that the casual fan would want. Where at least the other miniseries, the Cybernetic Dawn, it was still the action-packed sequel. They were still doing Terminator 2 type stuff in that. It was still propulsive. You still have all these cool action sequences. You've still got Sarah Connor and John Connor running around. So it feels like a spiritual continuation of Terminator 2, where this is the text scroll. This is, oh yes, this happened. We told you that this happened in the text, and now we're going to elaborate on the text so that you can see it happen. But it doesn't even really feel that Terminator-ish, really.
Yeah, it's almost like if Nuclear Twilight, it should have been like Kyle Reese, John Danny Dyson, Griffith and the other dude, and a T-800, and they're in subterranean subway system fighting their way through Terminators to get with, and they've already got the virus and they've already got the spare chip or whatever, and they're just fighting their way through like Predator style, and we keep losing members. Danny gets killed and he makes sure he gives him John the instructions, and they're trying to save Kyle Rear. Like that, don't give me this whole, I don't know, the rest of it like I didn't need. And it could have been a lot more action packed and you still get to the exact same point. And Griffin, instead of getting killed, he gets captured, and they can still torture him and use him to get T-1000's look. You know what I mean? Like there's a way to still tell the story and check all these boxes, but have it more of like an action style as opposed to this just word soup kind of a thing. So anyway, it was fine though. There was, like you said, nothing in the series pissed me off. I was never like, oh, like that's not what I wanted to see. It was all fine. It was just such a slower pace that it was kind of annoying.
Well, again, the goal is to find a way of continuing a story that seems to have concluded. And the other miniseries tells you that they did not win the day, that Cyberdyne is still a problem, Skynet's still a problem. So either the first issue of this miniseries is the entirety of this miniseries, and then you go, oh, wait, we didn't actually solve the problem after all, and here's us dealing with the new problems because we didn't defeat the threat like we thought we had. Or even half the miniseries is them building up to what happens in the Terminator movies where, okay, we sent them back in time, they're supposed to fix things. But then John's like, oh, except that I know that it didn't fix things because this still happens. And him seeing, okay, like partway through this miniseries, we're like, okay, this is where I stopped knowing what the future is. And now I don't know what happens. In fact, what you do halfway through the miniseries, you kill John Connor, and then Danny Dyson has to figure out what to do now that the Messiah is dead and there's still Terminators running around, and you play the paradigm. You're like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen anymore.
Yeah, let John die taking a bullet for Kyle Reese, right? It's like, you know what I mean? Do something. Come on, let's do something. But yeah, whatever. It was fine. It was fine. But again, it's just a lot of the pitfalls that this entire franchise has. They just can't figure out what the hell they want to do. I don't want to rehash too many times, but it was fine. And I do think it's interesting that they were, I will say the concept I really like, if they had pulled it off correctly, where it was 2 issues that kind of bookend the movies. One's a prequel, one's a sequel. And it's like they're wall working up, and you're seeing Terminators go back in time that affect one story, and then where the kids, where everybody ends up at the end of the first story or the beginning of the second story, and then the shared final issue. I like the concept, but you still have to read it in order, right? Whereas technically the first story is happening first, but it's the second part of the Zero issue when it probably should have been the first part of the Zero. You know what I'm saying? Like that is like, it sounds great when you're talking about in a boardroom, but once you actually have to, like, you're a monthly reader having to read this, you're like, well, which issue do I read first? You know what I mean? Whereas we're reading it after the fact with all the issues available, and you can kind of choose your own adventure. And then completely blowing the deadline and having one series run longer than the other and delaying issue 0 is a huge problem. But I will say I do think there is a way to make doing this work, and I appreciate the attempt at it.
If I recall correctly, it was Billy Hines who sent us a social media microblog written by series artist Gary Erskine, almost certainly on Blue Sky. Since Frank has nuked his personal Twitter account, the Skeets read, 28 years ago, I was working on Terminator, Nuclear Twilight with writer Mark Paniccia at Malibu Comics. It was a wonderful opportunity to contribute to the Terminator universe. There had only been 2 films at that point. Mark and I were given plenty of previously unseen concept art from Van Ling at Lightstorm to help visualize the story, including Skynet exterior and interiors, arachnid hunter killers, and concept art for the proposed time machine, seen in Genesis many years later. We were able to show Kyle Reese being sent back for the first film, the reprogrammed Arnie sent back for the second, and also introduce the soldier who would be the template for the T-1000, Robert Patrick. Likenesses proved a complicated experience with some actors' agents. Terminator 2, Nuclear Twilight was an enjoyable series to work on for sure. Thanks also to colorist Moose Bauman, who was doing exceptional digital back work in '96. And Malibu were the best looking comics at that time. One of the suggested reasons Marvel bought the company. Also interesting to note that I was sent color Xerox and contact sheets by FedEx. No digital files or emails, and I didn't have a PC until '98. That was a Pentium 200, so you can imagine what Moose was working with. Old school magic. Frankly, the work still holds up today.
Okay, this was collected in the UK by Box Tree in the late 90s. It's never been collected anyplace else again. And it's another one of my frustrations where Dynamite made that big deal about doing a Kickstarter and collecting all the Terminator stories, and all they're doing is recollecting the Dark Horse. I don't even think they're collecting their own stuff. And this Marvel material has just lost media, essentially. They don't have, if you don't buy the original miniseries or you don't happen to have access to a UK trade paperback from 25 years ago, then you can't read the story in print. So that kind of sucks. And my understanding is that the Zero issue in particular was low orders. Like it come out so late and the interest had died off. So apparently the Zero issue is a little tougher to come by. So you can't even finish the story if you try to collect it, because there aren't as many zeros as there are number ones to finish the story by a fair margin from what I understand.
Well, really? That's interesting. I mean, yeah, but it's just, the reason it's weird is because, like, it's not uncommon. I've listened to enough of your podcasts about this stuff where you can hear the order numbers per issue start to dwindle, but because of the weird ordering of these, that it goes 1 has way more issues than 0, when really it should be the 5th issue has like nobody who ordered it. Mm-hmm. The number on the cover doesn't line up with what you think should have happened as far as sales go. So,
and
but you're right.
That for a bump
it's a shared issue for 2 series, so you would still think there would be a lot of them out there, because even if you have the hangers on from one series and the hangers on from another, but I guess since they were linked, it's the same pool of people. But
yeah. what page would you like from this miniseries?
I think it would have to be, let me see, that's a good question. We're not picking covers, right?
Typically not. If you desperately want a cover, I'll give you a cover, but I tend to like the interior page because that's more interesting. Everybody wants a cover. That's why they go for so much more money.
Yeah. I think it would probably be, man, I had even seen it while I was
And if you were picking a cover, it'd be the Kyle Reese or no? Would you want the Terminator instead? Which one would you want?
No, I get issue 1.
Okay, and I'd go for the Kyle Reese one.
Maybe page 15 of issue 1 when the Terminator comes back online and just absolutely annihilates this guy. And the top panel is the guy like looking, it's the T-800 looking at him through his like red, it's not infrared, but like that red sort of Terminator vision with the little, where it's like, what are they, like the little sensors that are clicking on things. And then he just pulls his gun and just blows this guy to pieces. That one's pretty cool. And I thought there was one from the Kyle Reese fight that was pretty cool too. Let me see.
There's a nice splash page of Kyle Reese in the 4th issue, the quasi-final issue, the splash page where he's sitting on his bunk looking at the Sarah Connor picture.
At the image, yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. If you're going for a Kyle Reese, that's a pretty good one because at least he has the helmet off, so he doesn't just look like General Issue.
Oh, it would probably be the first page of issue 3.
And then for me, it's going to be page 15 of the 4th issue, the page you described. So I was like, nice, thanks for getting that in there, where John falls to his knees, recognizing the scope of what's been accomplished, and it's just a nice shot. But I love Gary Erskine. I've been a fan of his since I picked up the first issue of Warheads from Marvel UK around 93 or so. And what's funny is that he goes out of his way to not draw genitalia in this miniseries. And one of the things that really struck me when I read that book in 93 was there's clear silhouette scrotum of the goat-headed demon in that story. And I'm like, what the heck? I'd never seen that in a Marvel comic especially, so it kind of blew me away. And he just had such incredibly detailed work. And of course, Warheads was basically like Colonial Marines, but Vertigo version. So they're all weird and alternative and Doom Patrolled out and stuff. And he only did like a couple or 3 issues before he bailed. And so it's like, those are the 3 issues I bought. And as soon as they brought in another artist, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm done with this book now. And I realized immediately that the only reason why I've been buying this book is for the artwork. So I love this stuff. I love all these pages. I'd be happy with pretty much any of the pages. But I really like that one. And I like that he's got the Connor right there on his shirt so you can easily identify him. But also just is a good encapsulation of what's happening in the miniseries. And I didn't necessarily want a Terminator page because as much as I like his artwork, there's a streamlined quality to the endoskeletons where you've got like really detailed CDs and really detailed outfits, and then they are kind of smooth and they're not shiny either. And so I kind of want one without a Terminator on it. So that was the one I picked. But I'd be happy with pretty much any of these pages. I love his stuff, despite his inability to differentiate faces very much.
Yeah, and I didn't describe my page. I just said it. So it was the first page of issue 3. It's after Kyle Reese's unit's been annihilated, and he's like, it's a huge splash page of him laying in the rubble with the Terminator holding like a big ass like shotgun and like an Uzi standing above him. It's a pretty cool shot.
Oh yeah.
With all these like, it's like a taxi that's all shot up and everything. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I looked at that one too. That was a cool one. Yeah.
Yeah, this guy, I don't think I've ever really read anything that he drew, but I really enjoyed the art in this series. Like I said, I think I had the note in my notes like 2 or 3 times how much better this art is than what we had in the other series. So he reminds me, it's like I said, Sean Chin and maybe Steve Dillon are the sort of vibe I get from this dude.
They've all got those English faces. So Steve Dillon has the same issue. Very, especially when the Terminator, I mean, it's not the Terminator, the Punisher series, where it's all these supposed to be these New York mobster guys, like, but they all look like they're English. What the hell's going on here? But it still was cool looking. But I like Steve Dillon fine. I love a lot of what Gary Erskine does. If you're looking for who I favor, it's definitely going to be Erskine.
Right on. I agree. Looks good. I'm glad I think we pretty much aligned on these 2 issues.
Yeah.
That's good. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm like, man, is this as boring as I think it is? But like, it shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. Like, it's hitting all my like it's hitting all the fan service for all the movies, but man, stuff is boring.
Yep. Simpatico. And it's nice. It's nice to not be the contrary. It's nice that we just both agree and just no arguments there. Change of pace.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
I'll be back. Detroit, the near future. Officer Alex J. Murphy and his partner Ann Lewis fight to rid the decaying city of the criminal element which infests it. After being mortally wounded in the line of duty, Officer Murphy is outfitted by OCP with bulletproof titanium robotic parts and with computer-enhanced motor and sensory capabilities. He has become the ultimate super cop, RoboCop.
Since the 1988 RoboCop cartoon was produced by Marvel Productions, I figured that I'd cover it alongside the Marvel comics. I had it in my head that it only ran 8 episodes over 2 months, but it was actually 12 episodes over nearly 3 months. We covered 3 issues of the comics in each of the past 2 episodes of this podcast, and we'll do 4 issues this time. The current plan is to cover 5 comics next time, then a 2-parter, and finally the 6-issue closing arc of the run. That means either splitting 10 cartoons across 3 podcasts, doing a bunch of animated episodes when we only cover 2 comics, or just altering the schedule, not limited to continuing cartoon coverage when the comics move on to other publishers. On that last point, we would no longer be covering Marvel cartoons with Marvel Comics, which begs the question, why not continue on to the 1998 Alpha Commando cartoon series run by X-Men's Larry Houston, which spanned 40 episodes? But why stop there when there are 22 episodes in the live-action 1994 TV series? And once you've done that, there's the 4 Canadian TV movies from 2001. So that's approximately 58 hours of content that I would need to consume, which if I broke down into 8-hour shifts, would take over 7 days. I could devote every waking hour to it for a couple weekends, forgoing any podcast production, and with minimal human interaction to distract me. I could become a robo-podcaster. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but I don't like you or hate me that much. More importantly, I don't care about RoboCop that much. This is a backup feature to the Terminator podcast that I wanted to do, motivated mostly by my wanting to mirror how my Aliens podcast briefly touches on Predator content. There are only 9 Predator movies, at least 2 of which are co-headlined by Xenomorph content, all of which are better liked and more successful than anything in the RoboCop franchise beyond the first movie. And all told, that's maybe 16 hours, a single day's waking hours. And even then, I do them somewhat begrudgingly. So long story long, the Marvel cartoons suck, and I don't want to do them no more. Especially when a major reason was comparing and contrasting the approach of the cartoons to the comics, when both angles can be summed up as plain wrong. Let me count 4 issues of the ways in which Marvel failed RoboCop. According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, RoboCop number 7 was released on July 17, 1990, and the story, Robosaur, was credited to writer Alan Grant, with art by Lee Sullivan and Kim DeMulder. In this one, Jurassic Park comes to Detroit, but as a zoo. In story, the rationale is that OCP encouraged them as part of the Delta City revitalization. In reality, it let the quote-unquote creative team do Jurassic Park stuff for a month, including a saboteur releasing the dinos from their cages to go on rampages at the behest of a rival corporation, Nixco. The legally distinct Dino Park took a page from Raising Cane's playbook regarding Chick-fil-A and opened up directly across the street from the dilapidated Robosaur world. An old hippie is keeping a bunch of animatronics working for his meager livelihood, making him a suspect, but not really. His overly aggressive robot sailor sidekick is also a suspect, but I already told you that the culprit was legally distinct, not Wayne Knight, except he successfully gets away and almost assuredly won't be addressed again. Why you would trust a lackey named Dogbite, I surely don't know. In a cutesy turn, RoboCop uses an Aquaman-like signal to call on the mascot Sailor Robot for help, so it commands one of the animatronic dinosaurs to save RoboCop from a T-Rex. RoboCop didn't directly control the Robosaur because I guess the writer's idea of a half measure between the RoboCop cartoon and the PG-13 sequel was Big Boy Adventures. I'm not confident that we'll ever have total numbers for Marvel's RoboCop circulation, but I still have Capital City Distribution's unit sales to work from. The 7th issue moved 22,700 copies, down exactly 2K from the previous month. By comparison, Ghost Rider number 5 sold 52,800 copies, though that benefited from a Punisher guest spot, a Jim Lee cover, and actually being a hot new title. Aside from the first issue of the Prime Suspect miniseries, even RoboCop number 7 handily beat anything Dark Horse ever put out, usually by double or more. Debuting that same month were AC's Bob Steele Western, Dark Horse's reprint 0 issue of Aliens vs. Predator, first issue of Duckman, and the Predator Predator trade paperback, DC's Spelljammer and TSR Worlds, Disney's Arachnophobia movie adaptation by Charles William Rotsler and Dan Spiegel, plus The Jungle Book, Eternity's Lensman, Galactic Patrol, Gladstone's original Dick Tracy comic album, Harvey's 3 New Kids on the Block #1s, Step by Step, Magic Summer Tour, and Valentine Girl, plus Wendy the Good Little Witch Digest, Malibu's Alien Nation The Spartans, Marvel's Darkman magazine, Mirage's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the movie, and now's Twilight Zone one-shot. Harvey's Baby Huey, the Baby Giant hit issue 100, but of 101, so it ends next month. The second and third issues of Marvel Comics' adaptation of RoboCop 2 were also out, and I happen to have a period review of it.
Excerpt from the August 1990 cover dated Amazing Heroes number 182. Comics in review. RoboCop 2, written by Alan Grant, penciled by Mark Bagley, inked by Tony DeZuniga, edited by Gregory Wright, published by Marvel Comics. This comic is an uninspired adaptation of RoboCop 2, the sequel to RoboCop. An adaptation of a sequel has everything against it in terms of having any originality, energy, or inspiration, and this comic in no way transcends the implied limitations. The writing and the art, done in standard mainstream division of labor style, is uninspired. It's as if Marvel didn't really care what they put out, as long as it was an official RoboCop 2 adaptation. Any art and writing team would do. The characters are drawn in such a way as to be virtually indistinguishable from one another, except by externalities like hair color, clothing, etc., and the writing leaves you with no feeling toward any of the characters. You neither despise the villains nor support the hero, and more complex emotional or intellectual responses are completely out of the question. The story, which is credited to Frank Miller, is reactionary. I've heard Miller described as a mugged liberal, but this story, and his other works, seems to worship rule by force, righteous force to be sure, and view urban dwellers as either criminals or hypocritical ruling class bastards. A corollary of this kind of neo-fascist belief system is that unions are bad, and there is a definite anti-union sentiment here. The police in Detroit are on strike because their salaries have been cut by 40% and their pensions canceled, good reasons in my book, but throughout the striking police do not identify themselves with the union they form. They speak fearfully of strike breaking because the union has lists. Finally, the one member of the police force that isn't paid and doesn't need a pension, RoboCop, leads them off the picket line in battle with the ubiquitous drug-pushing scum that serves the villains in today's post-Cold War entertainment. Naturally, monopolistic corporations are attacked too, but frankly, that jives historically with nascent authoritarian populist movements, i.e. the first stage of fascism. One need only look at Huey Long, Juan Perón, and dare I say it, Adolf Hitler for similar anti-big business sentiments. I'm not saying Frank Miller's a fascist in the making, but the entertainment he turns out is. In any case, don't waste your money on this comic. It's frankly too boring and inept to bother with. Grade, 1!! Review by Robert Boyd.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, Marvel's RoboCop number 8 was released on August 21st, 1990. Gangbuster was again by Grant and Sullivan, with Keith Williams inks. You'd think the story where RoboCop teams up with an R2 unit that speaks in Popeye would have been the one that broke me. If I'm being honest, it was the two-parter that put RoboCop in an international war zone within the first 6 months of the title, but also this one. Omni Consumer Products wants to devalue property that it's seeking to acquire for the Delta City project, so it pays the Psychoid gang to go into a turf war with the Urban Curse, seen in previous issues. They actually repeatedly send a business suit into gang territory with a stack of bills to openly bribe them into an ongoing gang war. Pluck any random schoolboy off the playground, and they could offer a better game plan with less cash outlay and exposure. For instance, Officer Ann Lewis picked one member of the Urban Curse to routinely bribe for information. Keep in mind, this is on a Detroit policewoman's salary, a department that spent more time on strike in the RoboCop trilogy than fighting crime. A plot point is that this stoolie manages to save 20 of Lewis's $100 bribes as his nest egg to escape from the streets, and having $2,000 in cash on hand is what convinces the Curs that he's their traitor. I don't even go to a comic convention with less than $2,000 on me. Even adjusted for inflation, that's less than $5,000, and this story was set in the future. I know this seems like a tangent, but stay with me. This kid goes by Einstein, and Lewis bribes him because she thinks that he's basically a good kid who's too smart for this life and has too much potential. He's a slim blonde teen whose attractiveness is hard to gauge, because everyone looks rough under this artist, but is at least average for this world. Now, despite all the lip service paid to his intelligence, he seems to just be another punk in the game, not an accountant or planner or anything. I was never in a gang, but I otherwise was basically this kid, and I'm fully aware from personal experience that his advantages would make it relatively easy to work your way out of the hole. I've been paying into FICA since I was 16, but working pretty regular even before I was legal to do so. I didn't get any girls pregnant, didn't get hooked on any substances, showed up for most of my shifts, and did a good enough job to usually be in a model or leadership role. All else being equal, if I had more ethnic hair or darker skin or the wrong accent, I would have lost a lot of that advantage. Everything would have been harder, and it was hard enough that I felt like checking out a bunch of times. Long story, persistently long. I don't believe that this white boy had no choice but to join a gang. I don't believe that he would have kept his hands as clean as portrayed as a member. And I also don't believe that he could be as smart as we're told he is if he makes so many poor decisions with as little to show for it as $2,000 that his partner thinks is worth killing him over. Plus, the psychoids are coded as British skinheads, and the urban curs are bikers who look like greasers, and every single person in this Detroit set comic is unambiguously Caucasian. Not only is the story fairly worthless at a surface level, but the unconscious bias driving it piles yuck on top of ugh. In the end, RoboCop and Lewis manage the gang war so that all the bad guys take each other out and the survivors get arrested. Lewis saves Genius, and to make up for ruining his bad name with the urban curs, gives him the latest OCP bribe to the psychoids so he can start over elsewhere. If you need to, pause this podcast for a moment and think of all the extra legal and prejudiced calls Lewis, a supposed good cop, makes. Keep in mind that this is a fictional piece of decades-old, rose-tinted, pre-Rodney King police apologia. Now think about the cops that are providing cover for ICE raiding grade schools to arrest and deport children without due process, while also beating and criminalizing anyone that says boo. This is part of why I won't be covering a bajillion hours of RoboCopaganda, but mostly because too much of it is as dumb and boring as this comic book series. Debuting this month were Dark Horse's first Terminator miniseries, DC's Tiny Toon Adventures magazine, Disney's DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, Eclipse's M, John J. Muth adapting Fritz Long, Innovation's Vampire Companion on the Anne Rice beat, Malibu's Ape City #1, and Marvel's Darkman movie adaptation color miniseries, plus Mighty Mouse. Joining Baby Huey on the trash heap was Marvel's Camp Candy at #6, though all of the Harvey revival books are on a death watch. Collected this month were Dark Horse's second Aliens miniseries, and Disney's Dick Tracy, the complete True Hearts and Tommy Guns trilogy. Numbers from Capital City Distribution for the issue were 21,200 copies, shedding 1,500 discerning readers. You may have noticed that I stopped using Marvel Age magazine for RoboCop coverage, but I have thumbed through parallel issues for the terse one-sentence copy on a given RoboCop issue, or a single-page feature on the Darkman comic. It's just that nothing found in there has been worth reciting here, so I haven't been. In my search of numbers, I did tumble upon another review for RoboCop that I might as well read for you now.
Excerpt from the March 1990 cover dated Amazing Heroes #177, Comics in Review, RoboCop #1, written by Alan Grant, penciled by Lee Sullivan, inked by Kim DeMulder, actually Kim Mulder here, edited by Gregory Wright, published by Marvel Comics. RoboCop #1 is an arresting and intriguing book from start to finish. Alan Grant is a superb storyteller. The script is well paced, and every line of dialogue serves to move the tale along. Nothing is superfluous. The art is excellent. Penciler Lee Sullivan has a fine sense of design. The panel arrangement on each page is well thought out, and he makes extraordinarily effective use of every panel design technique imaginable. From the close-ups to the wide-angle shots to perfectly placed perspective scenes to the 5 simple line sketches outlining the death of RoboCop's human past, Sullivan has chosen the most powerful methods to communicate what is a powerful script. The best of pencils can be ruined by a bad inker. Here we have one of the best inking jobs ever. Kim DeMulder follows the intricacies of Sullivan's work very well. Cross-hatching, feathering, and blacks are all used in the right places. Just enough, not too much. The cover is one of the best superhero covers I've seen. The design is an arresting shot of RoboCop, with 3 members of the Urban Curs gang coming at him from the rear, and the old Detroit skyline, including the OCP building, in the background. It is stark, powerful, and technically perfect. The colors are nice. The deluxe printing, which results in high-intensity colors that distract from some stories, works perfectly here. All in all, RoboCop #1 is a fine piece of work for all involved and is well worth checking out. Grade 4 exclamation points. Reviewed by Mary Smith.
I'll note that this same reviewer savaged the Disney Dick Tracy miniseries, which I loved. I covered it with Chuck Coletta on the second episode of the Amazing Heroes podcast, available on this same stream, unless Spotify hit us with an umpteenth copyright strike. I'm a harsh critic with high standards, and I'm usually aware of when I'm indulging something with my own peculiar preferences that won't translate for others. If nothing else, Kyle Baker's art should have rated more than 1 exclamation point, so her giving this trash 4 makes me call her taste into serious question. Moving along, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, Marvel's RoboCop #9 was released on September 18, 1990. Power Play was by Grant Sullivan and DeMulder. This is actually part 1 of a 2-parter under the umbrella title Vigilante. Someone must have remembered that this was a Marvel comic, and that Marvel comics are about costumed crime fighters with superpowers. At least, the ones with good and rising sales numbers match that description, and the RoboCop series had been going in the opposite direction. But also, this is licensed product from a decade that didn't allow Dum Dum Dugan to be a monthly Godzilla foil or Spider-Man to web sling around a Transformer. No, we're going to be treated to fake satirical superheroes like General Power, Beer Gut Man, and the commie liberal busting Doc Chainsaw, who even wears a red MAGA hat with his moniker. It's like a martial law comic if the creative team had sold their souls to Jim Shooter for a book produced by the hacks who did those proto-Valiant Nintendo and World Wrestling Federation comics, but with lower production newsstand values, and also maybe if the comic had been left in a ditch like discarded porn and sun-bleached across a particularly sweltering summer. I've neglected to mention that most of the coloring on this book so far has been by Steve White, and it has been one of the flattest, drabbest comics that I have seen in my life. White was a Marvel UK regular who typically did more colorful books on better paper like Dragon's Claws and Action Force, so I can't imagine what kind of grievous personal slight Lee Sullivan must have perpetrated against him to result in a book so committed to the ugliest ends of the spectrum. You could try to argue gritty realism, but I don't recall every surface being caked in mud during the RoboCop film trilogy. Gregory Wright took over this issue, and you can sure tell by the Vigilantes' costumes, but more generally, the characters look less like they're coming out of the 9 Inch Nails set at Woodstock 94. The gist of the story is that all these wannabes have been inspired by the reality TV series Detroit Vigilante. To quote Blast from the Past, "Oh my lucky stars, a Negro." So far, Sergeant Warren Reed has had a single cameo, and only OCP's Donald Johnson has had an ongoing speaking role in this series. It took 9 issues for a named original black character to show up in a Detroit set series, Jesus H. Boddicker. RoboCop's issue is that these fake fascists aren't authoritarianisming right, and that they should get out of the way of his cybernetic boot on the populace's neck. To this end, he forcibly stops Detroit Vigilante's vehicle, illegally detains and harasses him, demands that he stop producing his TV show, and assaults him for not immediately complying. All RoboCops are robo-bastards, regardless of where the book dictates our sympathies are supposed to be. In the B-plot, a father and son are bullied by the urban curse, until the son is accidentally killed. Even though RoboCop kills the 2 bikers directly responsible, the father vows further vigilante justice. Introduced this month were DC's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Annual, Walt Disney's Autumn Adventures, Epic's Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Eternity's The Original Tom Corbett and Tom Corbett Space Cadet Book 2, 4 more Harvey New Kids on the Block books, including Backstage Pass, Chillin', and Comic Tour 90, plus Richie Rich Gold Nuggets Digest, and Malibu's Amalgamated Regional Militia, or rather Larry Neven's ARM, Biting the Dust were Harvey's Wendy, The Good Little Witch at 97, and Valiant's Super Mario Bros. At 6. Collected this month was First Comics' Elric the Weird of the White Wolf. Another big dip, as per Capital City distribution, sales were 18,600 copies. The book will not return to the 20K range again, losing over 2,500 readers. Introducing costumed heroes was clearly not to the book's benefit. I joke that this title wishes it were doing NKOTB numbers, but I have to suspect that was publisher speculation because RoboCop will outlive all 4 of those dubious titles.
Excerpt from the December 1990 cover dated Comic Scene number 16, One Man's Psychosis. In the violent world of Alan Grant, one usually walks alone, by Phil Nutman. Alan Grant, it seems, is everywhere these days. Between Marvel and DC, there are at least 5 titles a month carrying his writer credit and several others in England bearing his name, either solo or in collaboration with Judge Dredd creator John Wagner. And that doesn't include all the projects he has in the pipeline. At DC, Grant is scripting the new Demon series, has just left Detective Comics to pen the monthly Batman, is co-scripting Legion 90 with artist Barry Kitson on an ongoing basis, and has co-written the 4-part Lobo miniseries with Keith Giffen. Additionally, he has rewritten the first Batman story for a forthcoming 80-page special anniversary of Detective Comics. For Marvel, Grant has been the man behind the RoboCop series. He also adapted Frank Miller's RoboCop 2 screenplay. At Epic, he's working on a top-secret limited series he refers to as the Japanese Project. And after several years of delay, The Last American will appear in a revived form. At Fleetway, the British home of Judge Dredd, there's an upcoming 12-part Judge Anderson series, which will eventually appear as a graphic novel, a second Judge Anderson epic that runs to 18 parts, and a 12-part Durham Red saga, following the adventures of the female bounty hunter who appears in Johnny Alpha Strontium Dog. At the British Independent, Trident, there's a new project called Apocalypse, on which Grant will be working alongside Pat Mills, John Wagner, Kevin O'Neill, and other top talents. And finally, there's the long-awaited Batman Judge Dredd team-up, written with John Wagner, which is due to appear next year. Comic Scene. How did you end up writing so many titles at once? Alan Grant. Fortuitous timing, I suppose. When I left Fleetway to go freelance a couple of years back, I wrote up several proposals and sent them out. Normally, you don't expect everything you send in to editors to get accepted, but just about everything I wrote was picked up. You send a proposal out and you don't hear anything for months. Then one day the phone rings and DC says they want you to do the Demon, so you start working on that. Then the next week, Marvel calls up and asks you to do RoboCop. Being freelance, you don't turn the work down. But I found myself in the position where suddenly everyone was ringing me up to ask me to do something. Everything seemed to come to fruition at the same time. However, better too much work than not enough. Comic Scene. You've remarked that you're not a big fan of RoboCop. If that's the case, why did you say yes to the title? Grant. I had done a couple of fill-in issues at Marvel, a Silver Surfer story, and a Nick Fury tale, and they kept asking me if I'd be interested in doing some other work for them. But I never really had time to sit down and think about it. Then editor Gregory Wright called me up to ask if I could submit a proposal for RoboCop. At the time, it was the only regular work they were offering, and as I wanted another string in my bow, I decided to do it. I didn't want to get typecast as a DC writer, although I don't want anyone to take that the wrong way and think I'm unhappy with them. I'm not. It was just that I wanted to work for Marvel and RoboCop was what they offered me. Being freelance, it's good to have a footing in as many camps as possible. Anyway, I did the proposal, and I didn't think I would hear any more about it because I felt the proposal was very Judge Dreddian. But RoboCop is very much like Judge Dredd anyway. Well, they liked it. What they said was, originally it was my stuff in Detective Comics that they had liked, and they wanted me to write it that way. But after a while they said, this may be your style, but it's not our style. Can you rewrite this? The way I saw the character was not the Marvel way. Comic Scene. It seems to be a difficult title to write because the character's a movie figure, not an established comic character. And part of the success or failure of a tie-in is whether or not you can reach the movie audience. Grant. Right. RoboCop's an odd one in that respect. The movie audience is primarily adult because it's an R-rated film because of the violence. On one level, the comic would have to be ultra-violent, which I wouldn't mind writing. But that's not acceptable to Orion Pictures, who own the character, because RoboCop is now a successful cartoon character with a younger audience. It's a bit like Batman. You want to keep the older readers, but at the same time, you can't write anything that's going to offend the parents of young kids who read the comic. And the RoboCop comic seems to be very popular with younger kids. My nephew, for example, is 11, and RoboCop is one of his favorite characters. He and his friends are big fans. Comic Scene. But you're not. Grant. I enjoyed the first movie, and I had great fun adapting Frank Miller's screenplay for the sequel, which I think was wonderful. But the RoboCop I've had to write for Marvel is not really the character from the movie. The problem I've had is I can't find the heart and soul of RoboCop. Don't really know who he is. There's only so much you can do. Comic Scene. But you point out he's very much like Judge Dredd, a character you've written many times. Grant. Yes, and I can't understand RoboCop's motivation beyond the most basic elements. Judge Dredd is very easy to understand. He has been brainwashed into upholding the law and has very little conscience. Basically, he's the upholder of a right-wing regime. What is RoboCop? He's a human brain stuck in the body of a machine. I would have been happier if I could have worked for my proposal, in which I wanted us to sit in on the conscious dialogue between the human brain and the computer brain. But unfortunately, Marvel was planning the revival of Deathlock, and they were going to use the same device. the same caption layout, so I had to abandon that idea. If I had been able to do that, I feel like I would have gotten more depth to the character. I have a problem believing in a 2-ton robot. Comic scene. So what did you do to try to keep your interest? Grant. When I found out it was my nephew's favorite comic, it made quite a difference. That was the realization which helped me to get a perspective on the title. I'm writing it for 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. The comic doesn't seem to appeal to readers above age 15. It works for the kids who are too young to go see the movie. I don't usually write comics specifically for fans. I write them for my own enjoyment. But once I knew who the audience was, I found I could have more fun with it. But I'm leaving the title with issue number 10. Comic scene. Why? Have you taken it as far as you feel you can? Grant. It's a combination of things. Yes, there's a certain limit to what you can do with the title, and my main decision was based on the time factor. Triton just called to say that the Apocalypse Project is now going ahead, and I very much want to be involved with that. To do so, I was going to have to drop a title, and RoboCop was on the bottom of my priorities. When I told Greg Wright, he then informed me that he was going to leave the series as editor with issue number 10, so we decided to quit together.
According to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, Marvel's RoboCop number 10 was released on October 16, 1990, and for the last time was by Grant, Sullivan, and DeMulder. In the concluding chapter of Vigilante, subtitled Rough Justice, RoboCop monitors the grieving father's apartment while calling the old man from his squad car to demand the cancellation of Urban Vigilante. OCP wants RoboCop to stay out of the way of all his new costumed helpers, but he once again ignores orders when he spied the now masked and caped dad running across rooftops. He makes his way to the Urban Curse Burger Joint hangout, which offers the only joke that I recall landing so far in this run, but it wouldn't work if I tried to tell it here. Meanwhile, crooks have realized that wearing a costume and pretending to be vigilantes gives them a free rein to commit crimes. That leads a pair of them to jump the Urban Vigilante's limo. This happens right around where RoboCop had arrested the vigilante dad after he'd managed to kill several gang members, a surprisingly strong body count for an out-of-shape schlub armed with a welder's torch and kitchen knives. A signal flare had been sent up to call in all vigilantes in defense of the Urban Vigilante, pitting them against the emerging costumed criminals and the Urban Curse. In the confusion, the dad got his hands on a bazooka and accidentally blew up everybody but RoboCop. OCP reversed course, backed RoboCop, and replaced the Urban Vigilante TV show with some sort of Muppet or Barney-type felt funnies. It was a pat resolution, given that today, and probably even in 1990, the network would just hype the search for America's next top vigilante. Numbers from Capital City Distribution for the issue were 16,900 copies, so things are going south with a quickness after holding reasonably well for the first 8 issues. Marvel had successfully launched a group of books as a sort of class of 1990, and I guess the book looked good enough for readers to give it a chance. I suspect that the release of the RoboCop sequel to theaters marked the end of that credit extension, recalling the impact Alien 3 had on those comics. In less than a year, the book has dropped over 60% from its debut numbers. Saying hello this month were Disney's The Little Mermaid adaptation and Walt Disney's Peter Pan, Eclipse's Steed and Mrs. Peel, Eternity's Lensman War of the Galaxies, Harvey's Richie Rich and the New Kids on the Block, Marvel's Zorro, Innovation's Child's Play 2 adaptation, Millennium's adaptation of Anne Rice's The Mummy or Ramses the Damned, plus The Wild Wild West. Saying goodbye were Eclipse's extremely belated James Bond Permission to Die at 3, Malibu's I Love Lucy at 6, Valiant's Captain N, The Game Master at 6, and most grievously, Harvey's Casper Digest magazine at 18, Casper the Friendly Ghost at 260, Hot Stuff at 177, Richie Rich and Cadbury at 29, and Richie Rich, the Poor Little Rich Boy at 254, with the cover blurb, Collectors! Last issue of series. The other cancellations were spared that final undignified cash grab. Trade paperbacks include Aircell's The Men in Black, marking this as a banner month for properties to eventually be adapted into Will Smith movies, and Valiant's Best of the Nintendo Comics System and Best of the Super Mario Bros. As a DC Comics fan in the 90s, I had a disproportionate sample size of Alan Grant's work from which to arrive at my disdain for it. When you read dozens of comics from a creator, you're bound to find something that you do like. For instance, the opening arc of Shadow of the Bat and an Armageddon 2001 annual with Jim Fern art that portrayed the Batman as a tyrant deposed by Arkham rebels. That acknowledged, I tend to enter Alan Grant comics unwillingly and with a sense of dread. Out of those scores of Grant scripts, his RoboCop tenure was singularly pallid. It was just enough of an effort to qualify at the most basic level as a RoboCop comic, the reading equivalent of a coworker that puts in the bare minimum for it not to be worth the effort of trying to get them fired. These books read like they were being written solely to pay for the corn liquor that needed to be swilled to get through the script until a more meaningful paycheck gig came along. Rarely have I seen a notable scriptwriter so incurious about his subject. The book barely features RoboCop's partner, much less developing her as a person or her relationship to Murphy. His main contribution to the lore is Nixco, a rival corporation to OCP that alternates with OCP as to which evil corporation will be undermining or directly opposing RoboCop from month to month. Regardless, Nixco is mostly dropped after the first few issues, so then it's just alternating between OCP machinations and street gangs. Even if the licensor forbade doing anything significant with the movie characters, you could have dug into the underworld types in Detroit or non-OCP corporate maneuvering. John Francis Moore did a great job with that on the Dick Tracy miniseries, devoting much time to the rise and fall of a gangster that gets whacked in the first reel of the Warren Beatty movie. Worst case scenario, RoboCop and Murphy could be relegated to a supporting role, while the writer comes up with replacements to Bob Morton and Dick Jones to scheme against one another. Instead, this book made the cartoon seem three-dimensional. And I've mentioned that Grant couldn't handle the humor or satire of Verhoeven, but he opted for nothing at all in its place. This guy wrote Judge Dredd. No matter how heavy-handed Gregory Wright could have been as an editor, there's no excuse for this book to read like the old ladies at the Comics Code Authority wrote it themselves. Between the Aliens and Terminator podcasts, I've read a lot of bad comics, but there's usually some naive enthusiasm, or at least comedy of errors, to provide some form of entertainment. No matter how bad incoming writer Simon Furman could be, it can't possibly be as joyless and flavorless as Alan Grant. Furman is in no way held in the same curious esteem as Grant, but I've been entertained by his work in the past, and he's never given the impression of being too good for licensed product. After 10 issues of Grant sniffing at this property like it was expired milk, I only see room for improvement on the rest of the run.
New targets acquired.
American Gristle.
Anan Yamato NSFW.
The Bat Pod.
Ben Jedry, yeah?
Between the Pages blog.
Beste Tool.
Billy Hines. CH.
K9. Chris Day. Cozy 65.
Dave's Comic Heroes blog.
David Gallagher.
Who added, I will give a listen. We had a Terminator Ghost Recon crossover when I worked at Ubisoft, so we'll check it out.
Del Dracula, who also offered.
Did we figure out how to pronounce Paniccia?
Derek WC.
Doc Strange.
Dragon Master.
Dirk Ashton. Ed Moore at Teal Productions. Van Holes Podcast.
GNRB 395. Gas 55s.
History of Comics and Film. The Irredeemable Shag.
Janice Andrews.
Jared Keane.
Jason Morrow. Jason Santos. Jonathan Wilkins.
Keith G. Baker.
King Dinosaur.
Lamar the Revenger.
Mr. Perfect. Papico. Priceless Bois Art. Quiet Gay Guy. R.D. Liddy. Red Average Lane Enjoyer.
Relatively Geeky Podcast Network.
Superbound. And Thirsties New and Used.
In the year 2025, in the month of August, and the battle continues with
Dark Horse presents Terminator and Marvel Comics presents RoboCop. You have been listening to Terminator Now, a Rolled Spine podcast. It is in no way associated with Himdale Film Corporation, James Cameron, not even Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm just the best impersonator Frank could find, but I'm pretty good, right? No infringement of rights are intended, and it's all covered by fair use. Anyway, nobody's making any money on this thing, and hardly anyone is listening, so don't waste your lawyer's time.